Epsilon Eridani or another star system, we should know. And that because I have covered so many miles around this planet and have seen so many of these animals and walked in many of the pastures by myself with formalin in plastic, with something to, like a scalpel or scissors, to cut tissue that could be taken to a lab for analysis. I'm here. The bigger box is, what is the relationship of other intelligences that are not Homo sapien to planet Earth in this solar system? And the information I have is that it goes back at least 278 million years to competing extraterrestrial civilizations. For me, that makes reading Ryan's books, my books, Nick's books, Dolan's books, on and on and on. We need to be educated. And I do hope that what this is leading up to, no matter what the Pentagon is trying to resist and how difficult it appears to be now for, let's say, the House subcommittee hearing to keep going and doing more, we'll call them the interviews like they did with Grush and others, so that there is a dialogue that continues and we become educated. Because I do feel, very honestly, that a point in time is before us, that there is an important reason for all of us to be more educated, because I think that there is an evolutionary time coming where it will be very important for those humans here to understand bigger pictures. And I'll leave it on that note right now. Ian, I know this was a long and multifaceted answer, and I won't do this for the rest of the questions. But this is so complicated and yet at the same time simple, because it boils down to Earth, humans deserve the truth about other intelligences that are not only in our solar system, but that they are in many other solar systems that are not that far astronomically from us. So Ian, go ahead, and I'll keep my answer shorter after this.
Sure. Okay. We've got a comment here from William Milburn, who says, why don't they bring Corso's book and his interview to the Congress? Well, that's a good question. But also, while we're on the subject of Corso, of Colonel Corso, I've got Marty McFly says, does Linda have an opinion on Corso's son and lectures about the time travel aspect?
I have never talked with the Colonel's son. I was fortunate enough to be able to talk with Philip Corso for about 4 or 5, 6 hours when we were at the 50th anniversary 1997 conference in Roswell. He and I literally talked we did an interview with Art Bell that was very long, and then he and I talked for hours, and I had brought various cases and books, and it was very refreshing to talk with somebody that was giving me honest, straightforward answers. And then eventually, but his son was not in those discussions at that particular conference because he was doing other work with somebody while the Colonel and I were talking. But I was able to bring up difficult subjects, and the Colonel went deep into the well with me about what he knew. There is so much. There are so many facets. They go in so many different directions. And the whole idea of even trying to understand the real nature of this particular universe is part of the challenge. So I was also able to see firsthand the original manuscript that Colonel Corso submitted for the book that became The Day After Roswell, and it had more information in it. So on that score, I have been able to talk with the colonel directly, and maybe at some point I can talk further with his son. But let's go on to other questions.
Yes, regarding the cattle mutilations, I've got two questions here. One from Tim Ambrose, who says, was there any evidence of cattle mutilations in commercial feedlots? But also, I think we can tie this in here from Ima Enigma. Were there any mutilations reported during the cattle drives in the Old West or by the indigenous American people? You would think so if this was a paranormal thing. Interesting modern phenomena. Who recorded these first?
Really two good questions. And about the cattle drives, I am personally not aware of anybody ever reporting any mutilations in a cattle drive. If you have such information, I would appreciate if you'd email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. About the slaughterhouses and the places for preparing food and all of that, or somebody who had animals in a corral. I went to one of the slaughterhouses when I was working at Channel 7 and was working on A Strange Harvest. And it was difficult to go there and see the operation. And it probably was an irony that has never left me, that we are very concerned about the bloodless, trackless mutilations of a variety of animals that range from cattle to horses to every domestic animal that you can think of, and then wild animals that include reindeer and elk and marmots and kangaroos, and it just goes on, of the type of animals that have been found with these same bloodless, high heat at the excisions. And watching what happened in the slaughterhouse and talking with the owner of the slaughterhouse, I had asked that question. Have you ever had any animals brought here in which an ear, eye, tongue, jaw, flesh, genitals, rectum removed? And the answer in the 79 to 80 time period in Colorado at that time was no. That doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. But I think, based on, I've truly have interviewed about 3,000 people in the abduction syndrome. I have been to hundreds of sites having to do with animal mutilations in many, many different places. And I think that whatever the challenge program it is, that it has to do with the harvest of certain blood lines for genetic manipulation. And that certain blood lines also, I think, applies to humans. And that we are dealing with, as I've shared before, the DIA man who told me that he had worked on trying to understand the conflict between three competing extraterrestrial civilizations concerning Earth, and that there was long and bitter war in which the sides that would be pitted would be reptilians versus Nordics versus Greys. The Greys collaborating with the Nordics versus the reptilians in some cases. But there have been other cases where reptilians and Greys have been on the same ship. So clearly, it's not easily comprehensible. And then as time has evolved, more, I would say, more emphasis has been brought about the tall whites, which were not discussed earlier in the 70s and the early 80s, at least not in the way they are today. But fresh genetic material, I think, is what the goal is. Now the why, by whom, to what end, I'm certain that the government of the United States and the UK and the allies of World War II, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, I think all of those, they have a lot of information. So I'm going to throw it back to all of you. If we don't have solid official answers about the who, what, and why, do you feel that this is information that you should know about? Or is it the who presents the information to you, in which category of context? The original non-humans working through tall whites and Nordics, working through different ages.
The search begins. Back in the United States, Sophie and Dale wasted no time diving into their next phase of the adventure. With a newfound determination, they embarked on a mission to gather information from the most renowned Sasquatch researchers. Armed with their findings from Canada and Egypt, they sought to piece together the puzzle of Sasquatch's whereabouts. All right, Dale, where do we start? We've got a ton of reports to sift through, Sophie said, flipping through a stack of papers. Dale glanced over her shoulder, scanning the pages. Let's start with the most reputable researchers in the field. I've got a list here of the top Sasquatch experts. We can reach out to them and see what insights they have. Sophie nodded in agreement. Sounds like a plan. But what about the sightings? Any patterns we can discern? Dale leaned back, tapping his chin thoughtfully. Actually, yes. It seems like the majority of sightings occur in the Pacific Northwest. Dense forests, rugged terrain, perfect hiding spots. Makes sense. I guess we're headed to the wilds of the Pacific Northwest then, Sophie remarked, jotting down notes. Dale nodded. Seems like it. But let's not forget about the indigenous communities. They've got their own stories and legends about Sasquatch. We should definitely pay them a visit too. Agreed. We need to cast a wide net if we want to uncover the truth. All right, let's get to work. We've got a Sasquatch to find, Sophie declared, determination gleaming in her eyes. Dale smiled. Indeed we do. And who knows what other secrets we'll uncover along the way. Okay, what about equipment? Dale asked. We need to think strategically about the equipment, Dale added, tapping his pen against the table thoughtfully. We want gear that's reliable and affordable but still effective in our search for Sasquatch. Sophie nodded in agreement, her brow furrowed in concentration. Agreed.
Now we know that our key locations all around the world, and we've been there and experienced phenomena firsthand. It's not all love and light, I will tell you. No matter what people think, what other people say, sometimes it's a toss of a coin. Your experience will end in which way. Is it going to be okay experience? Is it not going to be one I like? Or is it going to be okay, it was a pleasant one? You know, I think a lot of the phenomena is just agenda and it's playing out. And we're left behind to try and interpret, is it a good and bad action? But clearly there are some which aren't so good. And there's been a lot of reports around ranch lands. I mean, we've got Chalk Hill Ranch here in Pennsylvania, Clearview Ranch in Colorado. We've got the Bartlett Ranch, which is in Colorado, Bradshaw Ranch, Arizona, Sherman Ranch, which we all know is Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, Mount Wilson Ranch in Nevada, Stardust Ranch, Arizona, M Triangle in Russia. It's interesting because I know Vitalik was here a minute ago. He's been there, and yes, he had experiences. And then the most recent one is the Meadow, which we believe is around about the location of Georgia. So I'm not going to go through all these because it is a lot. But Clearview is probably the most significant one I found interesting, because we get told about all the television shows, Skinwalker Ranch, this has been going on the book that has been wrote, which is, yes, I mean, I get along with George Knapp great, and he did a very good book, but it gets a bit bogged down as what is evidence. There is evidence at the beginning of the book, there isn't any evidence at the end of the book, and you kind of, ooh, you know, it's frustrating. And that's exactly what it is. It is so frustrating at these ranchers, because I've experienced that same phenomenon many times. It plays tricks with you. It's so annoying that you think to yourself, it's always going to be one step ahead. It always knows what I'm going to do. It's as if it knows what I'm thinking. Well, it's not as if. They do know what you're thinking. I know that from psychological and parapsychological experiments when we sat there and we've spent 5 years building up a circle of communication, instrumental transcommunication with some things which are communicating with us verbally, sometimes in the air, DVP, sometimes on the recorders. And we went down and we thought, okay, this is fantastic. Wouldn't it be good if we could ask some questions? A voice came back and said, give us your questions. Well, I spent years thinking, wouldn't it be great what is my questions I would ask if I could ask questions? And I said, oh, it'd be dead easy. I'll just this. And of course, that night, I had the opportunity. I was like, oh God, do I really want to do it? Do I really want to know the answer? Seriously, do I really want to know the answer? And do you know what they did? They answered all the questions before we even given them. They know what we're thinking. They utilize us. This phenomenon does. Not just the paranormal, UAP as well. And what was really interesting about Clearview is probably the most outstanding things, which struck me, was they were seeing these boxes, flying boxes, roughly 8 by 8, flying around, and some of them were landing and seemingly going into the ground. They also saw cryptids all around Colorado. The flat plains of Colorado can't really hide anywhere, can it? Big cryptids at 8, 9 foot tall. They stand out like a sore thumb, wouldn't they? And yet there was a map on the wall in a shows department of hundreds of sightings of them. See? It always happens, always happens. And what was really interesting is that the locals, sorry, if that falls down and then don't jump and scream, it's just a lead. We'll sort it. What people were reporting, strangest things, is that on this occasion, one of those boxes came down and hidden and literally kind of disguised itself behind 2 big oak trees which had been there for years. All the locals knew the area. There weren't many people live in this small village. And the sheriff came out and he saw it and he said, I'm not going nowhere near that damn thing. I'm going to get the main sheriff out here tomorrow. Didn't want nothing to do with it, scared him to death. So the main sheriff comes out tomorrow. The object's gone. But not only the object's gone, the 2 trees had gone as well. And there was nothing but grass, no disturbance in the soil of where those trees were. Everybody knew that. The whole town knew that. And it wasn't just 2 trees, a whole abandoned house, which had been abandoned for 70 odd years, which people passed regularly on their old dirt roads, just disappeared. It went, it gone. There was nothing there to show even where it had existed. That's the high strangeness you've got to get around. And this is the sort of things that occasionally have happened at Skinwalker Ranch. Plays with you. Objects suddenly appear on CCTV camera. They look like a flipping massive big building. It's there for like 3 seconds. It comes on, and it's gone. And you've seen 3-4 seconds of this. You go out there to the field, there's a 2-foot imprint in the ground. It's dry, hard ground. Huge weight has been applied to the ground. Something physical existed for a very short period of time. What the hell is this? I tell you where we're all going. We're all heading towards the other realities coming through. But that's what really struck me with Clearview, was apart from all those strangest things, the people who are having these experiences on a regular basis, paranormal, poltergeists, UFOs, cryptids on this ranch, things that DVP, direct voice phenomena, come out of the air, and it sounded like an electronic voice like that. Exactly, this is like electronic voice. And it said, attention, we are allowing you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us. And that used to come out every now and again. There's like a recorded message out the air. It's just crazy. When the Shermans were in the field, father and son, they could hear voices talking above them, about 5 foot above them. And he got so frustrated with the phenomenon, and I understand why. And he shouted up, he said, I can bloody hear you. And all he heard back was laughter. It's just crazy, trying to wrap your head around this phenomenon. That was a map that was actually in the sheriff's office. Got all those pinpricks of all these sightings of Sasquatch. A lot of it's open plains, some of it isn't. But again, they were being seen on a regular basis. This is Katie Grybowski. She actually is part of MUFON now, and she actually lived on Clearview Ranch, and she remembers all these incidents happening. It's incredible. This is one of the photographs of one of those objects, oh sorry, 3 objects that were caught in film, regularly seen in the skies. Where is it? It is in a very potent positive magnetic region of over 250 nanoteslas. And you will see that again and again and again. I know ways of doing that. Then there's Buffalo Ranch in Colorado. Now, what's interesting about Buffalo Ranch is that just massive amount of poltergeist stuff is taking place on the ranch. Stacking of objects, ranging of objects, very, very strange things. And Jeff Sailors has been managing it for about 9 years now. But there's this UFO phenomena taking place, or I would say it's UAP. But many cryptid encounters. There's been also Buffalo, which has unfortunately come to their doom. And it's the same thing. If you had a tick-off list, you can say, well, okay, this has got the same sort of things happening as well. They just identified this bull by putting a mark on it. Now, Mount Wilson Ranch in Nevada, which is very interesting, has that connection to Robert Bigelow. Now, most people here would just say, well, that was Skinwalker Ranch, wasn't it? Well, not just Skinwalker Ranch, actually. Robert Bigelow was involved with Mount Wilson Ranch as well. And here, you can see a photograph of Jacques Vallée and Dr. Hal Puthoff, which were involved with conducting some experiments at that location. This is Mount Wilson Ranch. This is not Skinwalker Ranch in Nevada. And it was purchased by Robert Bigelow. He didn't just buy Skinwalker Ranch. And some of these experiments were also conducted with Victoria Alexander. Now, Victoria Alexander is John Alexander's wife. Now, John Alexander has also been heavily involved in Skinwalker Ranch over the years. And here's the evidence that not only when you're searching for this, do you find that he once owned Skinwalker Ranch, Robert Bigelow, but he did in fact own Wilson Ranch, Mount Wilson Ranch, and also Flatbed Ranch. Flatbench River Ranch. 3 of them. The phenomena, yes, is present. The phenomena gets photographed day and night, light phenomena, crafts, strange things that are being seen. Stardust Ranch, which is in Nevada, specializes in horses. And in many of these cases, there are impact wounds on these animals as if they've been dropped from height. So they're not particularly bothered about us finding them. But most of what's happening here is strange balls of light. Things being seen in the sky, around the building. Dr. Levingood, who got in touch with the people that owned it, he's been involved in crop circle research as well many years ago. Conducted an investigation because the people that owned it said that they'd had interaction with entities and those sort of things. He was around on the scenes doing investigations on some of these ranches. This is Stardust. And the guy that was there, he said that I found this stone and I believe it was kind of left for me. It's a very precision stone with a nice cut mark in it. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I have to see the evidence of things. It's very difficult to prove if those are authentic or if it's got some sort of Dremel on it. You know, you just don't know, do you, these days? But, you know, anybody who knows me, will say, look, you know, I'm a man of evidence. You know, though the stories are really, really interesting and could be true, well, I can't walk away with that. I can't show it. I can't demonstrate that this is a true incident. I need to know. In Stardust Ranch, what happened was one of the guys said he had a samurai sword. Oh, just had a samurai just hanging around on the side there. And he used it to protect himself against being abducted. He claimed that him and his wife had been abducted. And one night he caught a little fella, poor little Grays, and said he sliced it almost in half before it disappeared and left a puddle of blood and whatever on the floor. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Horror film. But I've always been very suspicious about reports like that because everything that we get back about these entities is control. Control over us and that the metaphysical and that sometimes even shooting at these little guys don't do anything, do nothing. In fact, bullets go right through them in some cases. You know? And we've got old cases like that. We go back to Hopkinsville. Remember the old Hopkinsville incident? Giant ears, little aliens that attacked his family in the home. They shot them several times. It didn't do anything. You know, so, okay, I was very, very, all right, tongue-in-cheek on this one. But there wasn't actually a scientific report. And the scientific report actually stated that they were examining the blood. And at this moment in time, they couldn't identify it. Okay. But some people can tell that two ways, can't they? Well, they haven't identified it. They don't know yet. Or you could say they haven't identified it because it's alien. Who knows for sure? Downside of it, Levingood died in work. An unusual accident took place in work, and he died. So it never came out, the information, the analysis of what this markings and liquid on the floor, whatever, was supposed to have come from this alien. So it's come to a dead end, and a lot of things do when you put your research into these things. Nevertheless, though, these are some of the photographs that we said that he was taken on the ranch, and this was one of the little guys poking its head around the corner. You know what? What did I do when you first see that? I Googled masks. Wouldn't you just do that? Just Google masks, you know? And if you see something like that, and you're going to say, okay, all right, could be a mask, you know? But what I do find interesting is some of the photographs of that, because I do believe there's real phenomena happening there. But just as the guys from Skinwalker Ranch will tell you, it's happening all the time, it's happening all the time. No, it ain't. My team was there in October 2019. Barry Fitzgerald was there in 2019. And though he did record phenomena, that it's moved to the outskirts at that time of Skinwalker Ranch, not near the areas of the buildings, way out on the fringe of Skinwalker. It was happening in several other locations as well. But it's not happening all the time. And of course, it's very difficult when you're making a TV show. The demand is, something's got to happen. You know, and I get very frustrated sometimes watching TV shows, and I'm like, come on, guys, where's the evidence? Give me something I can get my teeth into. Not, it could be this, it could be that. The M Triangle is an interesting one. It's in Russia, but if you know, not too far away, by crow flies, is the Dyatlov Pass incident. And don't get me started on that one, because that'll be a whole lecture on that one. But I will say that is profound. But that area, military moved in there, Russian military, some time ago, and started doing experiments in that location. And it was basically a no man, you can't go, a no man's land, you're not allowed there. All cornered off, no way getting in. And now eventually, after some time, since the 1950s, because I think it was the KGB who were in there doing experiments, because they knew that location was something special. And the phenomena that was taking place there also was. And they left, which is now you can visit. And it is weird. How do you identify it? Well, as soon as you get to M Triangle, as they say, there's a massive statue. It's about 20 odd foot tall of an alien. About 20 foot, that thing. Some sculpture to represent the things that have been going on there. The guy to the right, Pavel, he was basically, you know, he gave up the army, went in there, had these experiences, comes out, joins, becoming a cosmonaut, became a cosmonaut, very good one, and came out of that location with great knowledge about astrophysics. Weird. But again, UFOs, paranormal, same thing. And of course, we know Sherman Ranch, same thing. And we know how hyper-pervasive they were setting stuff in the fields up, cameras. And then what would happen was, we want it in that field, set the camera up, it wouldn't be happening over that one. So they said, okay, put one in that field and that field. And it happened in this one. So they went, right, okay, put them all out. And then they came out in the morning and the wires have been ripped out of them. Because this is what they do. They can do that. It drives you absolutely potty. This is the light phenomena that Barry recorded. There is phenomena taking place there, absolutely. Well, not as prominent as, you know, as people would say. But it is happening. That was 2019. There's been lots of different pieces of footage of balls of light. But we don't know if we're dealing with balls of light in the paranormal sense or balls of light in the UFO sense. Because just because you've got a ball of light and you see it floating down the corridor in an old house, you say, oh my God, it's a haunted house. You see that in the sky, it's an orb. It's a Foo Fighter. It's a, whatever you want it to be, you know? Same thing, different mass, same thing though. Imprints into the ground of heavy things. bulls that suddenly disappear, prize bulls, and get somehow caught inside this tin container in a dazed state. They didn't even know they were in there until the guy found them. And they didn't even know how you get four massive, these are massive, massive animals, get four of them in one of those containers. You wish your life goodbye. You know, this is the bottom here is the only existing photograph of the wolf that the Sherman family said attacked one of the calves, and it was as big, it was up to here, literally up to him, which would be kind of a dire wolf size, which went out of existence 10,000 years ago. It's the only photograph in existence. He said they shot this thing so many times, and it just looks at him and walks away, just like they do with the Bigfoots, just like we do with the cryptids. Same things have happened not just in America, even in the UK. This is Ripperson Farm. Again, strange incidents regarding the cattle being relocated from one location to another. This is deer in Norway, not too far from Hasdalen. Who never heard of Hasdalen Lights? Same location. And 323 reindeer killed by lightning in Norway. You didn't hear much about that. I didn't hear much about that. Where did it happen? It happened here. Right there. Over 250 nanoteslas in a positive magnetic region. My senses started tingling a little bit on that one. Just about to finish off in Bradshaw Ranch. Strange phenomenon again. Same things. Very secluded places, these. Because I tell you why these attract the phenomena. Because it's out of the way humans. And there's goodies there. These animals, they can do things, you know, and they like to. And it's easy to terrorize people because they've not got as much support like we would have locally in an urban area. Light phenomena taking place. And some incredible things. Sometimes balls of light, this big, moving slowly across your porch. You can see them photographed. This is a photo done by Tom Dongo. And he's physically about the size of a football and intelligent. You know, and we have these strange footprints that appear. Size 2. Size 2, size 3. How many people in the audience got size 2 or 3 foot? Not many. One over there, yes. And here. It was her. But, you know, these small footprints that they're finding on the ranch. There's no children living there. So, you know, so whose are they? And they're fresh. And they see them regularly. Now, don't even get me into Blind Frog Ranch because there's a lot of stuff out there. And do you know what? I don't believe any of it. I'll tell you straight. There's lots of talk about, yes, I've been talking with someone from the Galactic Federation of Hindu and this, that, and the other. And I've just thought to myself, you know what? I don't even get involved in this one because it is a bit crazy. I have no evidence to show at this date that they're having anything similar to Skinwalker Ranch or anything other at the moment. It's an interesting program, of course, you know, but so that's about it. Portals do exist. Check it out. NASA will tell you they exist. These are photographs to the top left. People are more and more taking these rings of light and objects coming through and disappearing. I've seen this on the ground. I've seen it twice in my life. On one occasion, it was not the background I was expecting to see through it. It was slightly different colour and different trees I didn't recognise. Barry Fitzgerald's had the same thing as well, and he'll tell you the same. Most recently, though, is when we talk about not all of them light. Sometimes people are badly adversely affected by phenomena. Interference syndrome injury. This is a new one, ISI. We've only recently discovered it, and there's a lot of talk about it at this moment, where they're nicknaming it white matter disease, and this is part of being too close to the phenomena, UFO related, or UAP if you want to call it that. And it's the effects that we were unaware that could be happening to us. So one woman asked me today about, and it's the from the Windsor Hill team investigating Windsor Hill, about going out there and what do you do, you know. I said, well, you know what, it's a gamble, it's a toss of a coin. It always has been, you know. I wouldn't say never go on your own. I said it's always good to starve yourself of refined sugar and do that about 24, 48 hours before, because what happens is that your body starts to react it should, because refined sugar stops your fight or flight. You don't know that, so you go out there. But if you starve yourself like I do, 72 hours, don't have any refined sugar if I'm going out there to investigate. Because if something turns up, I want my body to tell me, listen, if it's saying get the hell out of there. Because, hey, we'll get the hell out of there. I mean, we were, you know, when we were in Palm Springs, we had to tailgate out of there. Me and Barry, we both knew something weren't right. Your body will tell you. You know, just got to allow it to. It causes adrenal weakness, sugar. So starve yourself 72 hours before going out there. You allow your body to tell you, should you take a step forward towards the phenomenon, should you see something, or back. It does glamour us, so we've got to be careful. We can be, the beautiful lights, arcing lights, beautiful. You can be taking a step forward sometimes and you can be drawn in by this phenomena. Well, last time that happened to us, and we were taking steps forward myself, and I wasn't on my own, there were 5 of us, including Barry. They were already on the ground behind us, and we didn't even know. We had to get out of there fast. And that was in the high plains of the deserts in Palm Springs. We find sugar. C5, exactly the same thing. You know, same as the sales table, same as things arriving, turning up. Exactly the same thing as like newspapers. This newspaper from 1936. It was an apple on a sales table from the Skull experiment, and it aged 500 days per day until it reached its normal standard looking for its age, the browning. 500 days per day after apportation it ages. I know this is also similar to something that Richard told me as well, about some experiments that have been happening regarding that. Boulder fields, you know, they're just boulder fields. You know, the phenomenon loves boulder fields. They're going about giant rock, how it gravitates to UFOs. It never was. This became famous because entities were seen coming out of giant rock, not that UFOs were around it. Where's it happen? Over 250 nanoteslas in the positive magnetic region. I can go on all day about these locations, just as the disappearances of the work of David Pallades. Everybody follow David Pallades? It's absolutely incredible. He's doing a great job. But the locations, the location is the same type of locations this is happening. So are people also disappearing? 4.5 million to date so far and rising. Unusually, they're happening in positive magnetic regions. Exactly the same thing. And you can pinpoint these things on map and cross-reference them between Bigfoots, UAPs. And just to finish on, these are all the old alien and demon thing what people like to throw down. You know, are they demons? Are they something? Is it just a name? Well, I don't know. It's hard to say for sure. But what's interesting is that on the left is the entity that appeared to Aleister Crowley in 1919, known as Lamb. He made a drawing of it, interdimensional entity. And this is middle photograph is taken from the one on the right, and it's blown up. And this is from an entity that was apparently captured on film during Stephen Greer's CE5 meditation circle. The only downside on this is that the entity on the right has had more work done on it than Michael Jackson. If you want to know more about what our encompassing Project Doorway and what it's involved in, it's easy in our UFO in training course. We have 3 here with us today. We don't often bring many with them because it's a lifetime course. It doesn't end. You're always getting constant information. And we're putting Project Doorway information into that now. And it gets more and more technically dated as time goes on. And just to finish on here, that during the break, we've got some incredible books that are going to be on sale. I know Mike Bowers literally brought his own whole collection nearly with him, yeah. And I know there's also some good books from Whitley here, so do take advantage of them. And if you want to really know more about this subject, it's not out there. It's with yourselves. You've got to start asking and looking at the right places because they want to hide this from you. That this phenomena isn't out there. It's right under our noses, and it has been for a long, long time.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
It was most interesting representing Moses. Now it's supposed to also represent the incident that took place with Moses. This is him on top of Mount Sinai, apparently, and holding the stone tablets. But the story relates to 4 fiery objects in the sky, which Moses was holding the tablets up to. Was there some type of divine incident that took place, assuming that these UFOs or whatever these things were godly or had some form of religious connotation? But what's most interesting to me is the horns that Moses has on his head. And it's a very interesting story how those can really come to be. Now, when we look through all different references of Moses, be it sculptures, stained glass windows, artwork, they all got these references of Moses with horns on his head. And it's not just him neither. There was a number of people throughout history who was represented with horns. Now, when you check into it, the information suggests kind of that people who had these horns or references to horns were workers of God or workers for God. In fact, probably higher than the halo, in a sense of speaking. But like I say, it wasn't just Moses that was supposedly a worker of God. We also have Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great's story is really intriguing because what he experienced was very well documented about flying shields. And as you can see in this image, again, we have references, statues, busks, lots of different references to him having horns, again referencing that he was a worker of God. And an incident took place many years ago when he was going on these warring, besieging of cities, and during one besiege of a city, which it was very difficult to actually do because he couldn't penetrate this massive walls around this city. They were like the walls of Jericho. They were like 50 foot in height, apparently. And what was very interesting is that these objects seemingly came out from nowhere, flying shields they were described as. And it was such a horrific sight. It actually scared his war elephants, and he literally had to cancel that day completely, the besiege. The following day, they carried on, and exactly the same thing happened. These flying shields turned up, but something else happened this time. A beam of light seemed to come out of these fiery shields and hit the wall, which, according to documentation, the walls just crumbled, allowing Alexander to gain access to the city of Bethsaida. So, did he have help from the gods, in a sense of speaking, or something else? But when it comes to the story of monatomic powder and the links to Moses, is that there is some confusion as to what mountain he actually was up. This is Mount Sinai, and this was initially termed the place where he climbed up the mountain and the fiery bush, and he conversed with God and the stone tablets and so on and so forth. However, there is a lot of confusion between Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb, two completely different locations, of course, and two different mountains, but a lot of confusion between the two because some documentation and scriptures suggest it's Mount Sinai and others suggest it's Mount Horeb. Now, this is Mount Horeb, and visiting these locations, Mount Sinai is a little bit more of a tourist location, Mount Horeb not so much. But there's some interesting stories connected to Moses' travel to the top of these mountains. And you can see here the distance between Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb. And it was a gentleman known as Egyptologist William Flinders Petrie in 1904 that went up there on an exploration of both mountain tops, trying to work out exactly which mountain did Moses ascend. Now, what was really interesting is that when he was up there, he discovered some type of ancient temple, and it was situated, I believe, on Mount Horeb, and it clearly looked Egyptian. Now, this area isn't even in Egypt, but it's certainly reference to Egypt, an Egyptian type of temple, and there was white powder all around on the ground. We didn't realise what that was at that time. But according to documentation, what that might have been is monatomic powder. He may have stumbled across an ancient temple that was producing, smelting gold, vaporizing it, and creating monatomic powder for the higher royalties of Egypt, such as the pharaohs and kings and so on and so forth. But we have this story connected that Moses went up the mountain, and then he came back down from the mountain after him conversing with God, And he realized that these slaves that had left and were walking through the desert literally were starving. And the story has it is that they were fed by the gods, a mysterious white substance that they ingested. Now it has been called other names. It's been called manu. It's been called manna. It's a strange food that was provided by the gods, the food of the gods. The word manna actually in Hebrew means, funny enough, spiritual nourishment. And this was supposed to help them. You know, they didn't starve. They didn't have so much thirst. And we have this problem where there was this mention to this machine that was delivered by the gods who could help create this. What exactly are we actually talking about here? You know, could we be talking about monatomic powder and the ingestion of it and the wonderful things that monatomic powder can do to the biological system? Of course, when he descended back down from the mountain and he realised what his brother had done, Moses was horrified to see that his brother had somehow collected gold and they'd made or forged this golden calf which they were using to pray to as a deity. And he was horrified. And apparently, according to the scriptures, God was infuriated. Our God, yes, the Catholic God we know. He had a bad day. And he wanted to smite him. And Moses pled with God, please don't smite my brother. You know, and but you know, when you read back in time about our friendly neighbourhood God, we can say for sure that he did have his bad days, and there is many references throughout biblical documents and scriptures about blood sacrifice to God, about sacrificing brothers and family members to him. Really, not much different than the Aztec gods and the Incas and the Mayans and so on and so forth. The same practice was even used in our early Catholic faith as well. And of course it's unheard of these days, but nevertheless, it was very prominent throughout biblical scriptures. And of course his brother was saved through Moses pleading to God not to smite him. However, according to the documentation, what happened was Moses had the calf broken up, which was gold, and fed to the Israelites. Now, you can't feed them gold, but you can certainly transform gold into a certain substance that they can, you know, that can be fed to people, and it has an amazing nourishment for the human body. That could be a clue as to what was really happening here and what this story really represents. But it wasn't just that, because Moses was also instructed by God to create the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark was brought back down from Mount Horeb with Moses when he descended. Now, the Ark is said to be, and I don't believe this for a second, that it's inside this particular church, Our Lady of Mary of Zion, in Ethiopia. And if you just look at the protection they've got, not a lot, considering the Ark is supposed to be housed there. I don't think that's feasible. However, what I do know is that there are at least 6 or 7 replications of the Ark, identical probably, and you wouldn't be able, I mean, with us not seeing it, how are we even to know what was the original and what is a replica? Very hard to tell. I mean, we can just look at the one that was seen in the Indiana Jones movie, and if we saw that as a prop, how would we even know that's not the original one? Very difficult, as you can well imagine. But he got from God instructions on how to build the Ark. The Ark was said to be about 4 foot 4 inches in length, 2.5 feet in height, and 2.5 feet in depth. It was made from gold and wood, and it weighed, working out the dimensions and how they would have created that in them days, must have weighed around about 4,063 pounds. That's, to you and me, about 40 stone. That's a lot of weight. Now, if we take in consideration all the visual references we have of the Ark, all the drawings, all the paintings, we tend to only have like 4 guys carrying the Ark, sometimes just with one hand. I mean, you know, these weren't like Popeye. I mean, these were, you know, these were just generally slim guys, and the weight they were carrying must have been tremendous if those dimensions are correct according to the biblical scriptures. Now, if the gold was half as thick, it would have weighed approximately 2,032 pounds. Even that's a lot of weight. Even at that weight, if 12 men carried the ark, each would have to carry 169 pounds each. But there's no references to say that 12 men carried the ark. In fact, only 4, 6 at the most probably. Or, you know, I've never even seen descriptions of 8 people carrying the ark. But most of them, it's usually 4. How did they manage to carry something of such weight? Or really, did it weigh that much? One of the biggest reports of associated with the ark is that its power. It had the power to level armies, and nobody really knows where this energy came from. But according to documentation, and if you look back, I think we've messed up in regarding its reference somehow, because it's not associated with ark as in ARK, as a something carrying device. It is ark as in ARC, like an arc of electricity. And that's very interesting, because when Graham Hancock, the researcher and author, started looking into the information pertaining to the ark and stories connected to it, there were some references to numerous people, usually guarding the ark, that had mysteriously been killed by an arc of light, electricity, or something similar coming from the object, this device, the ark, which killed them instantly. So it was a very dangerous piece of equipment, I'm sure. So what was it that had this incredible power? According to ancient scriptures, it was also a communication device for the gods, to communicate with the gods. However, could it have been carrying something which wasn't the stone tablets, in a sense of speaking? Because the stone tablets were said to have just, formed to dust and were kept inside the ark. What if it was carrying something else, not dust, but some type of powder? You can see in these references again and again and again, we have people carrying the ark, bound about 4 of them, some of them only carrying it with one arm, and the weight must have been tremendous if the dimensions are correct according to the biblical scriptures. But then we have to ask about why monatomic powder might have even been inside the ark. Well, we do know through experiments and tests carried out in more modern day with monatomic powder that it can change the weight value of things it comes in contact with under certain conditions. Some of those questions might even lead to how the Egyptians might have used or moved large rocks. Even if you were to cover them in some type of white powder, could in fact change the whole weight of the stone, allowing them to be manipulated and moved into locations very easily, only to be removed afterwards or washed away, and so on and so forth. But what do we really know about the tests? Well, we know so far that ingesting this so-called food of the gods can activate your entire DNA and RNA, the cellular system, and can unlock the physical body's true potential. It allegedly also stimulates the subconscious, the conscious mind, and enhances mental alertness, physical strength, and endurance. Isn't that the stuff that you want to take into battle with you? When you talk about the ark and could level armies. I mean, just having your soldiers or people ingest this material would certainly help in combat, endurance, warring, and so on and so forth. Studies have taken place. This is the biofeedback study, and it's from the Alpha Learning Institute. Dr. Richard Gerber comments on monatomic gold and what he discovered. He said, the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce spoke about the healing use of the gold vibratory energy as a treatment to the coordination of impulses in the nervous system. Now, according to Dr. Richard Gerber, MD, author of Vibrational Medicine, monatomic gold is a product well suited to individuals beginning to open to higher consciousness, self-healing, and a path to, get this, spiritual transformation. Now, couldn't that be responsible for allowing communication between you and the god or gods? That could be that conduit Hence, we've got to remember the ark was being utilised as some type of communication device according to spiritual documents and biblical information. The tests that were carried out in Switzerland were incredible in regarding monatomic powder. And what they did at a particular laboratory is that the temperature of which the gold vaporizes is around 5,173 degrees. It's an incredible temperature. How did the ancients create such temperatures is even a bigger mystery as opposed to creating monatomic powder. It requires specialized vacuum chamber, a significant amount of energy to vaporize gold. Now we know we can melt gold. It's relatively easy to melt gold, but to reach those temperatures for causing it to vaporize in a flash of light, turning from liquid gold into a powder, is an incredible task. And you have to use some type of industrial heating ovens, very specialized, to produce those temperatures. And what they did is they have a special stone bowl, and it has to be stone because it's got to be able to survive those incredible temperatures. And they placed the gold, as you can see, into the bowl. And this was melted gold. Then they raised the temperature up and up and up until it reached vaporizing point. Now, scientists reported a blinding flash of light, and what remained was white powder that looked to be levitating, yes, levitating a few millimeters just above the stone bowl. Scientists also discovered that the bowl had no weight to it. Now, this is a big, heavy bowl, guys. And when they lifted it out, it had no weight to the bowl. It's literally just pick it out. Dead simple. It had no weight value. And when they removed the powder from the bowl, the weight returned to the bowl as normal. Now, from what we know is gold melts around about 1,064 degrees and its vaporizing point is 5,173 degrees. We don't know how ancient cultures managed to raise temperatures so high to be able to vaporize gold, but there's certainly seemingly some evidence of it. What's also interesting is that during the tests carried out on the white powder, scientists noticed something peculiar. When applying a certain frequency of light, get this, it's in the terahertz frequency range. We're going to be coming back to this terahertz frequency range in other episodes in association to the UAP or UFO phenomena. But when applying a certain frequency of terahertz, the range of light applied to the powder, something very strange happened. Around 43% of the powder simply disappeared. And it only returned once the frequency of light was removed. Now, according to the scientists, they could only theorize that the light source caused some of the powder to temporarily phase to another reality. Phase to another reality. Remember me saying that it might have connotations associated to UAPs and UFOs? This incredible semiconductor material and what its capabilities are. In other words, changing the weight values. I mean, we know that by messing about with terahertz frequency, they were also being able to increase the value, the weight value of things 10 times more, 7 or 10 times more than what it should weigh, just by manipulating the light. So in other words, you're changing the process of how things are weighing, such as from being almost anti-gravity to massive weight. And there are stories that UFOs have been seen to come down, even land on train tracks. And the weight of them is damaged the tracks so much that people think, well, whatever came down here was a tremendous weight. You know, a bit like Skinwalker Ranch when, you know, there has been markings in the ground and literally a foot deep in that dry, hard sand soil. It's very, very difficult, it's very, very hard. But the weight of something small that could literally press into the ground, a foot, must have weighed a tremendous weight. Are we dealing with something that has the capabilities of changing their weight value from being completely weightless to becoming quite heavy under certain circumstances? This is exactly the same thing that they noted during experiments, utilizing terahertz frequency light being applied and being removed from the actual source material, which was the powder inside a bowl. It's also interesting to note that the pyramids in Latin means pi, which again means fire. So there's this fire connection with the pyramids or something to do with heating. Exactly the same thing applies to monatomic powder. But the ancient alchemists weren't just in Egypt doing this, they were all over the world doing this very secretly. It's a very, very dark secret in regarding the manufacture of monatomic powder for the gods, the kings, the pharaohs, the highest priests, the hierarchy. And that was done in secrecy. And it was something that was often fed, certainly to pharaohs, on a regular basis. And the reasons being is that it would allow them to communicate with the gods. Here you can see some references to what is thought to be muscat. Now, muscat is the name given to this white monatomic powder that the Egyptians were using. And what they did is they made them, or somebody made them into kind of a bread, a cake type bread, which was cone shaped. And it was delivered to them and they would eat that bread on a daily basis. Remember that. And again, more references to the mysterious white powder and its use in Egyptian days. Only for the pharaohs, of course. Only for the pharaohs. Now, other terminologies makes it really interesting because when you look at the Egyptian word ka, okay, ka as in Ka, which means in Egyptian vital force, it's needed to get to the afterlife. This is what they thought, the Egyptians, that they needed Ka, which was this vital force, to allow them to traverse to the afterlife. It was a form of spiritual transport. Now, isn't it easy that Ka and our modern day transports are also called car, C-A-R, just a little bit of a coincidence? I don't really know. But then even if we start to look into the Lord's Prayer, for an example, I mean, could this have been a prayer for the pharaohs? Because we know that there are Egyptian, and not just Egyptian, Sumerian connotations and things being brought from those days, Egyptian days and Sumerian days, into the Catholic Church and utilised. It's even within the Lord's Prayer when we say Amen. It isn't really Amen, it's supposed to be Amun. Amun is the ancient Egyptian deity. Now, if we look at the Lord's Prayer, and most of us will probably know this, you know, if we consider that this was a Pharaoh's prayer, it may have read, Our Fathers, more than one of them, throughout the heavens, hallowed be their names. Thy kingdom come, because for a Pharaoh, he would, for certainly a young Pharaoh, his kingdom would come. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth, as it is in the heavens. Give us this day, remember I mentioned about having this on this bread, this on a daily basis? Give us this day our daily bread. This was for the pharaohs to be able to communicate with the gods on a regular basis. They had this every day. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. What is the power? What is this? Forever, Amun, which it would have been Amun. And you can also see references there to the Muscat and more Egyptian references. And this top right hand picture would show you the device, how they were created in, and these kind of bread cakes which they were eating, the pharaohs, which contained monatomic powder. It's also interesting to know Amun means the creator, just the same as God. You know, when we say God, we mean Amun, and Amun is the creator, just like our God is. But there are references to Catholic information within the Sumerian culture as well. So you can see how it's bled through into our current society and religions. I mean, when we talk about the crucifixion of Christ, the crucifixion, it wasn't something that was born within those days of the Catholic faith. It was also very much associated to Samaria. And you can see, even on this top left picture, that someone had been crucified. Exactly the same process what Jesus Christ allegedly went through on the cross. And the same process also applies to the practice of religion. And interestingly, the fish people wearing these fish hats in sort of Samaria, who were these mysterious fishmen? Is it a reference that they came from the sea and they were special beings of some sort? And there was a tinge to their colour as well. Green, in fact, was the skin of these so-called fishmen. The same colour of some of the Egyptian gods, like Osiris and so on. Very strange. But the fish hats is seen, and the staff from Sumerian days is still used within the Catholic Church today by the Pope, wearing the fish hat and the staff. It's a process of information that's come through from Sumerian days and bled into the Catholic Church. So when we look round at all these different references, even the cone has references associated in Sumerian days, which has been brought forward and symbolised throughout the Catholic Church. Even the Ankh is a representation of the Catholic cross. There are simply no differences. So what we're seeing today within the Catholic Church is things of a mixture of Sumerian and Egyptian information being brought forward and being placed and hidden within the Catholic faith, which we take on board and utilise and are aware, but completely hidden from sight is regarding its references and terminology from ancient days. It's a mixture, our current religion of Catholic faith. But even then, back in ancient times, they realized the power of light, the power of frequency, and when to utilize that light frequency for numerous things. And obviously, some of that might have been associated with the production or manipulation of monatomic powder, which was created by ancient alchemists for the pharaohs and kings and numerous different hierarchy around the world. This has had many different names. The Sorcerer's Stone, the Philosopher's Stone. It's got many different names, but it means the same thing. It's monatomic powder. Now, don't get me wrong. You can go onto the internet now and say, "Oh, I want to buy some in monatomic powder." You can buy it, but it's nowhere near the same as the monatomic powder that was created by the ancients. Far from it. This is more something which is associated with more modern times, doesn't have the purities in it what are required to do the same thing of what it would have done in ancient times. However, you can buy it. It does have some properties which are supposed to be very good for you. As we know from the biofeedback experiments, that yes, it can seemingly change the process of how we think and act. Tests were carried out by my colleague Barry Fitzgerald during solstice in Ireland, and an ancient chamber. Now, this particular ancient chamber would have got flooded at light at certain times of the year. Now, we are told that these locations all around the planet that are aligned to the sun and the solstice and equinox on certain days will allow the setting or the rising sun to fire its light through into the chamber and light up certain passageways or certain rooms where certain things took place in ancient times. This is what I'm referring to as a double lock system. Now, on this particular day when the sunlight fires in, it lights up. Now, when I talk about a double lock system, I'm talking about sunlight, I'm talking about vibration, I'm talking about frequency, and even timing, because timing is everything. And if we look at the Hypogeum, for an example, the Hypogeum in Malta is built and resonates at 111 hertz. It's a resonant chamber. The sound frequency of 11 hertz is known for cell rejuvenation and regeneration. This frequency was used as some form of healing. It's like going to the doctors or surgery. It's designed to heal wounds, and it resulted in divine meditation. Now, scientists realized when they started doing tests with this 111 hertz that wounds, physical wounds on the body, literally healed 10 times faster due to this frequency. So the ancients were very, very clever in knowing how these frequencies acted in regards to our biological system. Secrets that we didn't even know existed until we started looking into more modern day studies of these ancient chambers, resonant chambers. Let's take a little listen at what 111 hertz sounds like at the Hypogeum. we have Newgrange in Ireland, another location that Barry certainly visited more than one occasion. And this one is a resonant chamber, and again, the frequency, which is close to 111, is actually at 110. Very precise, these chambers. 110 hertz. Now it might say, well, it's only 1 hertz difference, but it does make a significant difference. That findings indicate that the 110 hertz, the patterns of activity over the prefrontal cortex of our brains abruptly shifts, resulting in a temporary switching from your left to the right side of dominance, related to emotional processing. This would have been turning on an area of the brain that biobehavioral scientists believe relates to mood, empathy, and social behavior. So basically, you know, if we're using more of our left-hand brain, this frequency would change it to more being the right-side brain, and vice versa. So this is completely designed, this chamber, as some form of meditation. You can also see in Newgrange this well-known ancient symbols of spirals. The spirals are supposed to represent doorways to other realities, and it's interesting that you'll find a very close association with these symbols all around the world to locations where these type of communications, resonant chambers were being utilized. Again, let's listen to 110 hertz. This is an OM generated under the conditions by numerous people of 110 hertz. And this is what it looks like when the sunlight, which is terahertz frequency, of course, because what happens is that when the sun is close to the horizon, be it sunrise or sunset, is because it's going through so much of our Earth's atmosphere, it's actually like a lens, a magnifying lens as well, that it filters out the infrared, resulting in a terahertz frequency. That terahertz frequency of light from the sun, be it rising or setting, you know, to think, you know, a lot of people like to do meditation. There is something special about the rising and setting sun when we sit in it, isn't there? There's this kind of meditative state, it's easy to go into, helps us relax and meditate and focus. You know, it still has those profound properties even today in modern times. However, this terahertz frequency of light enters into the chamber and producing an OM, because there were set out locations in these chambers where people would actually sit and produce an OM. Now, an OM is a certain tone created from vocal cords. Now, not everybody can do that now. I mean, if we look at the Gudra mantra, for an example, in India, the Gudra mantra, you'd have to spend half, according to information, spend half your lifetime from being a child being taught how to create the Gudra mantra. And that's if we've even got the vocal cords to produce that now. Very rarely do people have that. But back in ancient times, these OMs were very important, and some of these resonant chambers are designed for people to be there creating an OM. That OM, a certain frequency, which will cause the whole place to resonate because it's a resonant chamber designed for that frequency. When producing that and the frequency of light coming in, two frequencies, we end up with this double lock system. And when we've had these double lock systems, some profound things do happen in those locations. Now, don't get me wrong, it's hard to generate the right frequency of OM, but if you can just fine tune it electronically to be reduced in these locations on certain times of the day when that light, that terahertz frequency light, is going to flood that chamber, then strange things can occur. And under experiments, which Barry has taken part in these locations, at equinox, at solstice, with the terahertz frequency light entering that location and producing electronically the OM, there's some strange things where you get recordings of the rocks moving. No, none of these are huge rocks. None of these rocks are moving. But you can hear them shifting and moving as if they are. And not only that, sometimes we've even obtained drum beats. Barry's managed to get the sound of drum beats, distant drum beats, and chanting. It's not coming from our side. It's coming from somewhere else. Now, these locations, most of them were destroyed by the ancients themselves, about 70% of them for some strange reason. Maybe they were communicating with something and it went wrong, or they didn't like it, or whatever, but they actually destroyed around about 70% of their own locations where they were communicating with the other side, another realm, another reality. These intelligences, call them what we will. Nevertheless, though, some of them are still very much active today. Maybe not acutely attuned as they used to be because of earth shifts and so on and so forth, but certainly some of them show evidence that they are active under certain conditions through experiments. This is myself and Barry on location. Barry again, just another resonant chamber on the top of a mountain. These are ancient. I mean, these places are older than the pyramids in Egypt, and they're scattered throughout all Ireland, and they're very mystical. There's a lot of strange, profound things that do happen there that we just cannot understand why. I mean, we're talking lights, we're talking paranormal, we're talking even cryptids sometimes. Lots of strange things associated to these locations. And when you travel into this underground location, you can see the cutouts of where people would be sat to generate the Om. They're very strange in the way they've been built, and they've been built with purpose. So where's this fit in with metamaterials? Because right at the beginning I mentioned about UFO metamaterials, and how does that connect somehow? Well, you know, we know that monatomic powder is an incredible superconductor, and it can cause even anti-gravity. It can cause weightlessness, changes in weight depending on frequencies of light. What we see in the UFO metamaterials is something that represents layers and layers and layers of different various materials. And it's seemingly usually the same type of materials that are found in these so-called parts of, said to be parts of UFOs, or bits that have come off them. And you can see on these images the layering of these pieces of metal. And the laying is incredible. It's the microscopic, the thinner than a human hair. And how are these created is a mystery. Now, Dr. Hal Puthoff, who measured on Coast to Coast, detailed proof that crashes had happened, and goes on to talk about how these experiments that he's been involved in regarding the metamaterial analysis has been quite interesting. And also that the TTSA also had, this is to the Stars Academy, a side project known as the Eden Project. And that was also designed to look at UFO metamaterials. And they found that applying, get this, terahertz frequency of light could cause some of these objects to not only vibrate, which you could hear as a high frequency pitch, but also reduce their weight value, even to the point of micro levitation. So there are similar properties in some of these UFO metamaterials that we find in monatomic powder. This is what Hal Puthoff had to say. It was multi-layered of bismuth and magnesium sample. The bismuth layers less than a human hair. Magnesium samples about 10 times the size of a human hair, supposedly picked up in a crash retrieval of advanced aerospace vehicle. Looks like it's been in a crash, he said. The white lines are the bismuth. The dark areas are the magnesium separations. So the question was, what about this material? So naturally, we looked into all the national labs. We talked with metallurgists. We combed the entire structure of published papers. Nowhere could we find any evidence that anybody had ever made one of these. Secondly, some attempts were made to try and reproduce the material, but they couldn't get the bismuth and magnesium layers to bond. Thirdly, when we talked to people in the materials field who should know about this, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this. It's not obvious that it has any type of function. In other words, it's like going into a bar and making your own cocktail up. I'll have a bit of that, a bit of that, a bit of that for the very first time, put it together. Ooh, that's very nice. You know, it's kind of that situation, because scientists had never really put those things together before and don't know reasons why someone would in the first place. He went on to say, Hal Puthoff, that, well, years later, decades later actually, finally, our own science moves along. We move into an area called metamaterials. And it turns out exactly that this combination of materials at exactly those dimensions turn out to be an excellent microscopic waveguide for very high frequency electromagnetic radiation. Get this, terahertz. Terahertz, again, the terahertz frequency. So the wavelength is 60 microns, which is pretty small size, but it turns out that because of the materials aspects of this material, those bismuth layers that are act as waveguides can be 1/20th the size of a wavelength. And usually when you make a wavelength, it's got to be about the size of that wavelength. So in fact, it turned out to be the material that would propagate sub-wavelength waveguide effects. Why somebody wants to do that, we still do not have the answers for. So it sounds pretty complicated, this, but what he's trying to say here is that these unique properties with bismuth, magnesium, and the positioning of them, and the layering of them, the thickness of them, how they were manufactured, is all comes into tie about how they react and what they do. What we are now discovering are the properties that also have the same things found throughout monatomic powder. The incredible possibilities that this can be utilised in modern day science is amazing. Let's have a look at this particular piece. Alleged extraterrestrial metal from the bottom of a wedge-shaped craft in the late 1940s, made of, get this, 26 alternated layers, 1 to 4 microns, that's incredibly small, of dark bismuth, and 100 to 200 microns of silver magnesium zinc alloy. Each of the 6 pieces received from the US Army source were formed with a curvature that tapered. This piece was photographed by Tim Broer. Now, again, when you look at it, you can see the multiple layers of bismuth and magnesium. And that isn't by chance. Everything is specifically placed where it needs to be. These materials consist of 29 to 80 layers made up of microns, bismuth, silver magnesium, zinc alloys, and numerous others, some of which are, as we've said, tapered and have a funny shape to them. Numerous alloys can be found here on Earth. Now, some extraterrestrial elements have been identified as obscure purities. This is what he had to say. Some extraterrestrial elements have been identified as obscure properties. When you say extraterrestrial elements, it means there are things in this that aren't even found on planet Earth. The materials are atomically aligned, and scientists have theorized that the manufacture of such materials may have been carried out in a weightless environment. These material alloys were somehow created in a way that is kind of similar to 3D printing and acts like superconductors. Now, the thing is that some people have come forward, no names mentioned, and said, oh, you know what, we can't even 3D print metal. Well, that's not true. Of course we can 3D print metal. We've been printing 3D printed parts in metal for quite some time. When we look under the spectrograph and the analysis of these UFO metamaterials, the spectroscopy reveals the perfect processing of the metamaterial in the precise layers, radiating it in light, get this, in terahertz frequency range, causes them to lose weight and resonate harmonic frequencies. Exactly the same thing that monatomic powder does when resonating with frequencies of light in the terahertz range. It does the same thing. Such metamaterials are purposely manufactured, altering the isotopes, and may have the capabilities of anti-gravity and even invisibility. A number of these items said to be UFO debris were mailed anonymously to radio host Art Bellman many years ago, and they came to be known as Art's parts. And a lot of these have even went under analysis as well, and some of them were also very strange. You can see here from figure 3 of Art's parts, a quarter provides a scale of these thin multi-layered chips of metallic metals. These also went under analysis, and exactly the same things were discovered. But this is taken here in our office. This is bismuth, and this is what it kind of looks like if you were to sort of get a hold of some. Now, what we know about bismuth is that it has an incredible electromagnetic shielding properties. Now, isn't that a wonderful device to have around the skin of a craft of some sort because of its electromagnetic shielding properties? I don't believe it's by chance that bismuth is being utilised in these type of metamaterials. I want to talk about 3D printing of metal. It's been going on for a long time at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, that they are building machine parts and pieces of equipment by 3D printing metal. Printers that allow us to print in layers, tiny micron layers, to build them up. Very similar to maybe how some of these crafts or the skins or whatever they are being manufactured. This is a clip from Duke University demonstrating that terahertz frequency and metamaterials are being worked on currently.
Metamaterial is an artificial material that we make with a bottom-up approach. A metamaterial we can make by taking a piece of metal and winding it into a shape that looks like a C pattern. That metamaterial will respond in a certain way to light. And based on how many windings we make and the size of that C resonator, we will get a prescribed response to electric and magnetic fields.
So terahertz frequency pops up all the time, not just around the measuring chemical analysis of UFOs or UAP in the sky, where the light can be analysed under specialised equipment and see what type of frequency it might be producing. A lot of the times they're producing a terahertz frequency. In fact, sometimes they've even been described as miniature little suns when seen. In Halsdalen in Norway, the light phenomena, which has certainly progressed since earlier days, initially it was thought to have just been Earth-like phenomena. No way it is, because these lights now are firing beams of light down to the ground. There's something far more strange going on there. According to the scientists working at the laboratories in Halsdalen, that the light phenomena are seemingly intelligent and are identical to those anomalies we refer to as amber gamblers. I've mentioned this before, that some of these objects might not be physically structured objects, and they seem to be intelligent light plasma forms. These can be referred to as amber gamblers, which is what we call them. Some researchers have even measured the light frequencies of these in the terahertz frequency range, and have also been described as miniature suns, as I just mentioned. The terahertz frequency, again, keeps popping up time and time over and over. This is the report from June 2007. They certainly moved on from then, but there's a lot of information in this report regarding Halsdalen phenomena and the frequency of light that has been produced. Some of these take form into certain shapes and act intelligent as if the type of crafts. Some of them form to become triangles, but they seemingly simply disappear sometimes when aircraft are flying over, and then suddenly manifest again once they're out of sight. There is also ties into the implants, the alien implant phenomena. And when we're talking about that particular subject, we're talking about the materials and frequencies. These are just some of the strange devices that have been removed from numerous people around the world claiming to be alien abductees. This is one of the most significant reports ever made and discoveries that Roger Leir found. Now, Roger Leir, who was a medical surgeon, he unfortunately has passed away now, he had a number of small devices thought to be alien implants, scientifically analysed by laboratory experts. Some of these devices on extraction actually separated into 3 parts, and then later placed back in an examination disc. They seemingly moved and rejoined together again. Very odd. Dr. Leir's documents on the analysis of several objects have been released, showing that the materials used in the construction consist of, get this, bismuth, silver magnesium, zinc alloys, and a number of other metals that are seemingly identical in the makeup as the UFO metamaterials currently being analysed by Professor Hal Puthoff. They're the same materials that are found in some of these alien implants as they are in UFO metamaterials. You think that's by chance? I don't think so. And most of all, which is a discovery that we came across, myself and Bami, that isotopic analysis from 2009, this is analysis on the isotopes within an alien implant, were fascinating. The data showed significant differences between the isotopic distributions of most of the sample elements for which isotopic data was available and the isotopic distributions of the same elements obtained from earthly sources. The isotopic distributions of the elements in the sample, however, differed by as much as 4% from terrestrial distributions of the same elements, indicating that the sample probably didn't originate on Earth. Now, it's interesting to know that any deviation more than just 1% of the isotopic ratios would indicate a non-earthly source. We only need 1% to say that, okay, well, this isn't from here, you know, up to 4% differences. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, we have bismuth on Earth, and we might have it on the Moon or Mars or on other planets. However, the bismuth there and the bismuth here will have different isotopic values. The isotopic value shows where it's from, such as we here on Earth for bismuth have a very certain type of isotopic ratio for bismuth, and on other planets it might change. Both be bismuth, but showing that they're completely from two different places. And what's also interesting about this is that the very same isotopic ratios, that 4% differential, is found in a UFO metamaterial analysis. So the question is that are some of these implants made from the same material that the craft itself is made from? And that might be a way of easily identifying the source, where it's come from, if it's one of ours sort of thing. I don't really know, but it's a bit of a mystery. But nevertheless though, do you think it's by chance that they both have a 4% isotopic differential? There's 12 years apart between these studies, of course, the alien implant study and the UFO metamaterials. But when you look at that conclusion, you say, well, hang on a second, and you bring them together, they're both 4% isotopic differentials. They're both made from the same materials. That cannot be a coincidence. Roger Leir's analysis also discovered that the objects emitted frequencies prior to removal. Now, two frequencies were coming from this implant. One of them was 137.7 megahertz, and the other one, get this, 0.5 terahertz. No explanation could be found as to how they were being generated. Some produced satellite and aeronautical frequencies, and following the meridians on the body can help identify what that implant actually might be doing. These things, and I'm sure many researchers out there will say the same thing, these are far more than just tracking devices. And it's also interesting that the exact frequency of 137.7 megahertz is listed within numerous different forums associated to radio hams. It's assumed to be a mysterious signal, 137.7 megahertz. You know, they think that it's been recorded, it's been documented, but they don't know actually where it's coming from. Is it some type of satellite signal? We do not know. But it's strange that 137.7 megahertz is also the same frequency, one of the frequencies, that these alien implants were producing. Then we have such technologies known as quantum locking or quantum levitation. This is utilizing certain gases and magnetics to be able to produce a semiconductor levitation. And it is actually fascinating to watch. This is old news now, guys. This is stuff that's been out for quite some time, which could be probably being utilized in modern day science and aviation practices.
So we have quantum locking. The superconductor is locked in space and it stays wherever I put it. You see, this is quantum trapping.
That's amazing.
As long as it's
so the
cold,
it's superconducting. It's frozen with liquid nitrogen.
Upside down.
Right.
And it stays locked.
So the fact that it's superconducting is locking the magnetic field in 3 dimensions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that pivots.
You see, because this is symmetric, it can rotate without break the locking. The locking doesn't break.
Right.
Because
so it stays there on the X and Y, but not on but it pivots on the...
Yeah, on the axis of the magnet. You see, if I can move it
Yeah.
on the side, it will again pivot around the axis of the magnet, because it makes sure that the magnetic field inside of it stays the same.
Right. It's astonishing. Can you put it on the track for us?
Yeah. I just levitate it above the track quite high, and I can just rotate it.
So it's actually floating above the surface.
Yeah, it's not floating, it's locked above the surface.
So you could tilt it at an angle and it would
Yeah,
still fly
I can
around.
do it like this, and it will just go around like this. I can then go and put it at different height, and then like this.
And lock it at the height.
Lock
right.
it, yeah, different height, different configuration.
Right.
And I can even lock it at opposite way. If you could just hold for a minute. Hi. I'm doing the
So
same
it can
thing.
hang
I'm
upside down.
locking it upside down, and then it is suspended.
Fantastic. Okay.
There is also talk associated to these materials being able to produce some type of invisibility. Now, we do know that we do have invisibility now, materials that can bend light around them. They've been out for quite a number of years, but I guess that they were probably introduced into the military complexes and industrial system many years prior to that. There are people that have reported seeing things which is, well, to me, it sounds a bit like a Predator movie. You know, that there's a slight shimmer and things have seemingly caught their eye, strange occurrences that take place. People visiting the national parks and forests, regions of the earth, have reported seeing something that resembles an optically camouflaged being of some kind, like I said, a bit like a predator. Often hearing it and only sighting it when it actually is in motion, causing a warping or blurring of the background around it. It's as if light is being bent around. One such witness was a family member of Dr. Bruce Maccapie, the former optical physicist for the US Navy and UFO researcher. Now, similar incidents have also been reported in Cannock Chase in the UK. These strange incidents where people have said that there was something there, but they couldn't see it properly because it had cloaked itself somehow and camouflaged itself somehow, bending light around it. There are reports of this around the world. Now, we don't know if it's some type of military exercise that's going on, or some secret experiments, or there's something out there that's also using this technology. It's a bit of a mystery, but some of these reports are really fascinating. And you can check into this yourself about some of the latest technologies. This is what's known as TR10 Invisible Revolution. And these technologies are showing and demonstrating how we now can create invisibility around a particular object, be it a person, a vehicle, or something else. So these technologies are absolutely being used. So monatomic powder seemingly has an association to UFO metamaterials. It was also used to communicate with the ancient gods. By ingesting it, it allowed them to have this spiritual connection. Not only that, but it also has incredible nourishment skills for the biological system. It also enhances their intelligence and so on and so forth. It would certainly be an advantage to ingest this when going into war, which might have been done when carrying the ark into battle, according to the biblical scriptures. The ark being ark as in ARC and not ARK as a carrying device, an association to being responsible maybe now and again for killing people guarding the ark when electrical light hits them. What is this device? Is it some type of communication device for the gods? According to the biblical scriptures, was it carrying monatomic powder, which would cause its weight value to become a lot less, allowing only 4 people to carry it? Who knows? There are so many questions unanswered about ancient monatomic powder, far different than the stuff that we can get hold of today, and UFO metamaterials, and its connection, all their connections with terahertz frequency of light. There's a lot of things we need to do. There's a lot of more experiments that need to be carried out and further studies, but I believe that these connections between all these things can't simply all be just by coincidence. So thank you for watching this episode on Project Doorway, myself and Barry Fitzgerald's work. And if you want to find out more about our episodes and what's coming, then please don't forget to hit the notify button or the bell. And please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.
I'm Shannon LeGros. I host a podcast called Into the Fray. And for most of my life, I've been capturing history in a bottle. No, not the history that we all grew up learning about in school or reading about in the newspaper, but the weird stuff, the bizarre, the strange. I collect eyewitness stories of people who've encountered the unreal. And today begins my own search for one of the biggest questions I've ever asked. Are we alone? So here's the deal. Unless you've been blissfully living under a rock for the last decade, you're probably aware that the world has gone crazy. Politics, societal unrest, poverty, global relationships, it's all in flux. Social media has made it easier than ever to express our disdain for each other, while television news is a non-stop war on any sense of well-being we may have otherwise managed to convince ourselves of. Wars are being waged across the Middle East, while inner cities remain an ignored battleground on our home soil. In the last year, the U.S. Navy admitted they were aware of aerial phenomena that remains unidentifiable. Former members of secret government-sanctioned organizations who studied the UFO subject have come forward, positioning the phenomenon as one of the go-to topics of discussion for news anchors, radio hosts, and late-night talk shows alike. Pop culture is full of aliens, while television execs have embraced the newfound popularity by blanketing networks and shows about men and women hunting flying saucers. Where UFO debates used to rage in cavernous forums hiding in the darkened recesses of the internet, today the verbal battles erupt on Facebook and Twitter. Somewhere in the middle of all this newfound attention, something has been lost. I no longer see the excitement over for the unknown that once inspired so many to look up to the skies. When the U.S. government is actively telling you that UFOs are real, what's the sense in being curious about anything? Search of stories, and maybe a few answers to since I was little, and yet I've never encountered one for myself. Over the next year, I'll be traveling the country along with the documentary team from Small Town Monsters in search of stories, and maybe a few answers to some of my questions. While there are a number of spooky, creepy stories about encounters with little green men littering ufology, it's not what drives me. I'm driven by curiosity and by a desire to learn more about the people who see these things. People like Dan Weiss.
Nice to meet you.
So I guess walk us through the story sort of from the beginning.
Okay. It's a warm summer night. My sister Stacy, she's a few years older than I am. She says, let's go for a walk. So we take a walk and we go around the block here. Here's the house. We just go around the block and we go over here one street over and we start heading down this hill and we can see Belgrade Gardens out here to the, to my right, and there's this big tree line behind there. And suddenly we saw it, and it's just like they describe in books and videos, it's like a saucer. And it seems so crazy, but this thing's huge. And it's coming from the south. It's kind of higher up on the tree level, the tree line. It's coming from the south, it's kind of moving to the north, and it's coming down slowly as it goes. Talking on the phone with my sister Lindy last night, like I said, she was so ecstatic about it, like more into the story than I was. I said it was covered in lights, right? And I go, you know what it actually looked like was that ride at the fair. It's called the rotor. You ever hear of that? You get in, it spins super fast, and you stick to the walls. I said that ride looked like a spaceship because that's how they designed it to look like. So, and it's covered in lights. And she goes, that's exactly what it looked like. Put that on a winch and threw it in the sky for a few minutes. I don't know.
Was there lights on, around the whole thing on the top of the dome and as well as underneath?
No, I think it was, I don't think there was lights, at least from my point of view. I don't think there was lights on top or bottom. I think it was just, you got just in the, I think it was in my field of vision for 6 to 8 seconds. So it was relatively slow moving, and it had kind of a humming noise, like a light humming noise, It's just covered in lights. It seems so silly to be covered in lights, Just everything's exactly how people describe it, seeing a UFO. But I think what gets me the most is whenever I've looked up videos or images of UFOs, I really don't ever see anything like I saw. Usually it's like, the video will be like a series of lights way far out, like you can't see any detail or anything, and they're here and they're gone. But this thing was clear and present, and it was just, and it just slowly moved below the tree line and it was gone.
Dan has been keeping this story to himself for almost 30 years. In that span of time, the cultural landscape has changed in so many ways. Pop culture has elevated UFOs into a position where they're never far from our minds, and yet, the reality of what an actual encounter is like has been ignored. In the last 2 years, the subject has been thrust into greater prominence thanks to major news stories, an expanding lineup of television shows covering the topic, and the number of celebrities and political figures who have involved themselves in the debate. These days, few people are looking to the skies, though, to satisfy their curiosity, and instead have turned to personalities and figures for answers. A far cry from the earliest days of UFO research. But what brought us to where we are today?
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thanks for asking.
And I'm going to have my phone out, but I'm not texting. I'm reading.
Alejandro Rojas
Okay.
is a journalist who covers pop culture, science fiction, and outer space-based topics, with a focus on UFOs and the search for extraterrestrial life. His focus at OpenMinds.tv is to cover the full breadth of the subject and to objectively report on the latest news.
How do you see, what's the biggest sort of difference between where the UFO world or where the UFO subject sits today compared to where it was, say, like 20, 30, 40 years ago?
20, 30, 40 years ago? Well, 20 years ago or so, when I first got into this, it was kind of a low point for UFOs. It wasn't taken as seriously or covered as much. Not like today, where we're in a very unique situation where the government's talking about UFOs, the president has been talking about UFOs in a serious manner. The credibility level of the subject is at a high point, higher than it's been in a long time.
David Weatherly is located in my hometown of Las Vegas. He's a paranormal historian who has written a number of books on a massive array of strange subjects. He's extremely knowledgeable about the UFO topic and its history.
Modern ufology, and when I say modern, I mean probably the last 10 years, it's taken some very curious twists and turns. When we look at the modern state of things now, the paranormal in general has become part of pop culture. This is because of the rash of ghost hunting shows, UFO shows that are on television. So all of a sudden, we reached a point where all of these topics become much more acceptable and a bit less taboo. What has happened in the midst of this evolution in recent years is that not only has the study of UFOs, the topic of UFOs, become something that's culturally acceptable, but a lot of other people have come out into the open in the midst of that. We have an amazing array of scientists, of military officers, law enforcement, a whole range of people who are coming forward and either saying, yes, I've had an encounter, or, you know, there's something much more to this topic than meets the eye, and it bears further study.
Ronald Regier isn't just a UFO investigator. He's a bona fide rocket scientist who has worked for Douglas Aircraft, which became McDonnell Douglas prior to becoming Boeing. He was part of the team that launched the Saturn Apollo moon rocket, and later, his position as an engineer made him aware of radar pings for unusual aerial phenomena such as the Iran UFO in 1974 and the Phoenix Lights. Ronald was also employed at a secure area in Nevada, which is tied to the infamous Area 51, known as S4. Later, he would become the state director for one of the largest organizations looking into UFOs, the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON.
How do you feel about the sort of change in ufology from maybe where it was like 30, 40 years ago to where it is today? How do you see the subject changing maybe in the public view?
There's more acceptance of the phenomenon now. We're getting back to where it's a serious subject, and that may be because of Reagan's mentioning it 7 times in speeches, and I think Bill Clinton mentioned a couple of times.
Do you think that makes it easier for witnesses to come forward, or, you know, because of the ridicule factor maybe being lessened?
Yeah, as long as it's not a ridicule. I've had a lot of witnesses who did not want to talk about it. They wanted to talk to somebody that it would be kept strictly confidential, and that's why it was so important for us to maintain confidentiality.
If there's one characteristic that marked the last 80 years of the subject, it was probably the way experiencers have been greeted with ridicule, consternation, or been simply ignored. In the earliest days of ufology, Many witnesses were met with a genuine interest and even excitement by family, friends, and even members of the press. That changed very quickly, however, when a scientific committee was formed at the behest of the Central Intelligence Agency who, more than anything, wanted the subject of flying saucers to simply go away. This kicked off what would become a pattern for the government's handling of the topic for decades to follow, and indirectly or directly may have helped form the basis for the treatment of witnesses. While the Robertson Panel and subsequent projects such as Blue Book did their utmost to debunk reports of unidentified objects, they also helped to further the false impression that witnesses are few and far between, and more often than not, are just misidentifying mundane craft or naturally occurring atmospheric conditions. Despite their best efforts, though, people have learned that strange aerial phenomena are being seen around the world by ordinary people on a daily basis. Dan Weiss doesn't seem afraid of ridicule, but it's taken him decades to understand that what happened to him is part of something much bigger.
Is it important to you that it's documented in some way, or is it more like, whatever, like I'm gonna have it with me forever because it's my story?
I think it's important so much as that it'd be nice to know if there's anyone else who saw something similar, or if they do in the future, you can point back to this and say, okay, we've seen it before. But I mean, that tree right there, that big one that's taking up most of the view, we could have been right here.
Yeah.
But maybe that tree, 25 years removed is just a lot. It'd have to be, right? Same with the big pine.
So it's straight ahead.
Yeah.
Can we pull into that parking lot over there?
Right in the corner area, there was like a path and we go in.
How did you all feel about seeing it? I mean, were you
Well, I ran in the
scared?
house. Like I said, we come around from over there. We came back around the road, ran into our older sister, second sister that saw this. And she said, yeah, I had seen it. And we talked to the neighbor of ours, older yet, and he had been jogging. And he said certainly he had seen it too. I ran in the house, and I remember my dad was on the couch right in the main room there. And I woke him up out of his sleep. I said, you'll never believe what we saw. But, of course, you're telling your 40-year-old dad that you just saw a UFO, and he said, why did you wake me up?
Is that pretty much really what he said?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Ryan Sprague is an investigator and author who lives in New York City. Ryan and I started out together as hosts on my show, Into the Fray. Eventually, he struck out on his own and now hosts his own podcast called Somewhere in the Skies, which was also the title of his first book on the subject. Ryan was also featured on a recent CW television series about the paranormal, but has since returned to independently investigating and researching UFOs.
For decades, UFO researchers have been trying to make what we do validate it, make it legitimate. And we always went to the government for that, which is good and bad. I always found it fascinating that UFO people never believe the government, but the minute they come forward and say, hey, UFOs are real, we acknowledge they're real, we're so quick to just accept that. But the fact that the New York Times broke this story and we found out that there was a secret program, we all thought it ended with Project Blue Book.
It was this guy, Lou Elizondo, who was investigating UFOs or researching them at the Pentagon. He's a career intelligence officer. He got hooked up with people in the government who have been working in the paranormal arena for decades. They were working together to essentially investigate UFOs for the government.
Even us in the UFO community had no idea that this program existed, and that they actually brought evidence to the table to show us these pretty captivating videos, I thought, the Tic Tac UFO in specific.
In 2004, off the coast of San Diego, there was an encounter by the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group. They were catching on radar these objects. At one point, they zero in some jets on the objects. One of the jets approaches the object. They saw some water churning. Above that water was an object he said was about 40 feet long. It was white, smooth, lozenge sort of shape. He even calls it a tic-tac. It looked like a giant flying tic-tac. He maneuvered toward this thing, and this thing began to match his maneuvers. It was starting to get behind him, which is a position you don't want if you're a fighter pilot, so he moved to get in front of this object, and the object took off at incredible speeds.
The fact is, the government has been actively involved in the UFO game going all the way back to the 1940s. In 1952, Project Blue Book was the name given to the Air Force-operated study into the UFO phenomenon, which was advised by J. Allen Hynek, an American astronomer and professor. Blue Book continued into the late 1960s before it was shuttered, but it's theorized that the Air Force, along with other branches of the military and the United States government, continued investigating the subject. In 2017, Luis Elizondo confirmed these suspicions by breaking his silence on the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Elizondo left the secretive government-sanctioned group, went public about its existence, and then joined an enterprise called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which counted many former and some current government officials and scientific minds. But the fact that To the Stars counted so many political figures amongst its ranks acted as a red flag for many enthusiasts and historians alike. But there might be more to this story than simply a secret government-sanctioned look into whether or not little green men are visiting Earth. And Greg Bishop is just one of the people who has reason to question the existing stories about ATIP.
TTSA was formed in, I believe, October of 2017. They had a press conference. Tom DeLonge, former guitarist, songwriter from Blink-182, he apparently got in touch with a bunch of people, former and maybe present government people, military, intelligence, and for some reason they saw something in him and decided that maybe they could form some kind of organization that would be a private UFO study, information gathering, basically a media empire to support itself so they could do this UFO research. That was their story.
Right now, Elizondo, who worked for the Pentagon investigating UFOs, he left and joined this group To the Stars, ran by rock star Tom DeLonge.
So now we have a situation where in recent weeks even, there have been all these revelations from government officials. We've heard about ATIP, we've heard about the fact that the Navy is looking at UFOs.
They gathered together people from different parts of the government, I think all retired, all in intelligence and military intelligence and some military. The important part of their mission that they stated, I mean, it's totally public, is they're trying to find out what is going on with the UFO subject to see if any part of the technology or the apparent technology can be exploited for profit defense, both. And as far as anybody knows, that's what that's what they're doing. I think they're doing far more than that, and they're not going to talk about it. But that's what everybody does. You do anything, you don't tell everybody anything, all that you're doing, because then you can't do whatever you're going to do.
You know, their look at some of these significant cases involving military accounts and so forth is really changing, I think, how the public in general looks at UFOs. And it's interesting to me because, for years there's been a disclosure movement. But come on, if the government came out tomorrow and said, we're going to disclose everything about UFOs in a press conference, it's going to take 1 hour, would you really believe that they were doing that? It's going to be pretty fascinating to see where things go from here, because I think there's been so much attention put on the topic of UFOs now that we've finally reached a zenith point where we can't really go back. We can't suddenly close the curtain and say, no, never mind, nothing was going on. They did that with Blue Book, but it worked back then. It won't work now.
So we have a celebrity rock star heading up what could very well become the impetus for disclosure. It's strange for sure, but far from the weirdest thing to ever happen to the field of UFO study. In my short time involved in all of this, I've come to see a dramatic shift in the way people react to one another online. Whether it's the number of former government officials involved or the murkiness of what their true agenda might be, To the Stars Academy is creating a debate. But why debate the true merits and motives of a group of scientists, politicians, and celebrities at all? Isn't this simply shifting the focus away from where it should be? To begin with? The further one wades into the current state of the UFO field, the more it seems to me that there is a disconnect between the people who have actually encountered a UFO and the personalities, agendas, and gossip that has built up around the subject.
The peer review used to be people talking to each other in journals. Now it's fighting on social media. That's basically ufology now, at least most of it. Just people yelling at each other on social media and arguing about stuff that's probably not that important.
The ridicule factor has played a very large role in keeping people quiet. A large reason why they don't at least publicly engage in this sort of topic is because they're afraid of the ridicule factor and this hurting their credibility. And so often scientists will remain anonymous. And the issue with that is, even though individual scientists may be interested, scientists are not the ones with the big bank role. They're not the people with all the instrumentation. These are organizations and institutions. And those are the people who have to want to be able to get involved in order to, put all these resources towards figuring something out.
It's exciting. I think for a lot of us, it's a new shift in how the public overall looks at UFOs.
What is that, the shift?
I think the public's perception of the UFO phenomenon is now acknowledgement that UFOs exist. That had been a question for so long. Just getting the government to say that, they would never do that. And then boom, out of nowhere, it happens. They said UFOs exist. Now the question is, I think, what are they? Who's in control of them? And most importantly, I think, what do they want?
You get an understanding of what the phenomenon is doing and what it's about by dealing with people that it's affected. That gives you an insight into what's going on. Just being just trying to heal them and help them and listen and be sympathetic. That's a huge part of the ufology thing that nobody's really talked about. It's not argued about on forums or anything, but the element of, what happens to people, how does it affect them, and how do they, if they need to, recover from it. I want to talk to them about what happened later. I want to talk to them about how it made them feel. I want to talk to them about how it changed their lives. And I want to talk to them about how they feel about it now and if they've been able to go on with life. Because I think, one, that helps the person, which is the most important thing. And two, like I said, it gives you an insight into the phenomenon that you wouldn't have had before. And that oblique insight is a lot more important than, to me, than what color was it, how fast did it go, what direction did it go. Who cares about that stuff? That could be interesting, but we have tons of data. Nobody's really done anything with it, at least that gives us any answers. So maybe the answers lie in the interaction between people and the phenomenon itself.
Do you, even at your own house though, do you still sometimes look up and, did it ignite any kind of an interest in this more so than maybe you think you would have had?
Yeah, I'm always interested in, I don't know if I should say space travel or something, but I'm always interested in space. And I do look up in the sky, and she's calling now. I do look up in the sky and say, wow, how cool it would be if I could see something like that again.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for calling me back.
Sure.
So, telling him how a little unsure of what I had seen. How cool it was that you had seen it too, being older, that it kind of reassured me in what I was thinking I saw,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would you have a second to kind of tell me what you saw? Because they're actually recording too, and I thought it'd be cool. It makes the story so much more credible when you have someone else telling it,
I had just gone for a walk around the block, and I was by myself. I was headed up the road, and I saw something that looked very much like a typical UFO with lights, and it was just a quick something out of the corner of my eye, and I thought, that's crazy that, I couldn't explain what else it was though, and I kind of shrugged it off, and then you and Stacy were walking towards me maybe 3 or 4 minutes later, and she was all worked up and said that you guys had just seen a UFO, and I said, well, I saw something also, but I don't know what it was, but I laughed and thought that's kind of what I thought it was too, and I was trying to talk all of us out of thinking that's what it was when a complete stranger jogging by overheard us and said, no, she's right, and you're right, I saw it also. Well, I immediately started to, in my own head, my first reaction was,
and I'll explain in just a little bit. But we got a lot to talk about today, and the majority of it is all about the Soul Foundation, man. They dropped every single video that we were like, when the videos coming? Maybe they're going to do it like, day by day. They dropped it all. And whether it was David Grush, Gary Nolan, Carl Nell, the list goes on and on and on. The who's who of the community was there talking about it. And the stuff that they were talking about, boom. We knew that some of this stuff was coming, and we We knew some of this stuff was kind of leaked, but when you hear it and you hear people talking about exactly what they're talking about in general, and then if you couple that with some of the stuff that we heard on the reason why we were late today, which again I will sorry to be vague, but you'll like the explanation. It all is kind of starting to make sense with a kind of optimistic, fingers crossed, maybe this is it. But then again, you know, the pessimist always goes, yeah, but who's the next Mike Turner? So there's a lot to talk about here. And there's also, remember, and I think we covered it on the show before, there was that video that I know they showed on like Larry King years ago, and the military said, look, we had this missile going up, and then we have video of this thing unknown comes in and pops it with 2 lasers, and then the thing hits the ocean. It doesn't blow up. It just, well, that's back in the news. And Lou Elizondo said he saw that stuff, and he told Sean Kirkpatrick about it. And Kirkpatrick said no, that was nothing. It was nothing. But speaking of Sean Kirkpatrick, he's changing his story now. Apparently, rumored is that now he's saying no, they told me to say that stuff. And whether or not it's actually from him or not, we'll debate that also. So that and more on today's show of The Big Thing UAP Tuesday. If you're brand new to this channel and you've never been here before, we cover this every Tuesday. We talk about the phenomenon every Tuesday. And you hit that button right there. You subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 200,000. So if it just came and popped up because you're interested in the subject, be with us here every Tuesday. Be part of the conversation. If you hit that button, it helps tremendously. Because we saw, like, there was one episode we had where it was like close to like 400. It was over 400,000. And yet we're at 125,000 subscribers. So if everybody hit that button, we'd be closer to 1 million. Because we need that many people to be part of this conversation. We need that many people to get unplugged from the Matrix. So hit that button, man. Comment, Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere podcasts are found. It's myself. It's Mark Riley. It's The Big Thing. Let's do it. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Big Thing, UAP Tuesday. It's myself, joined as always by my partner in crime, Mark Yodius Riley. What's up, Mark?
Christian, I am skating on an existential lake of magic.
What is that?
I don't even know what that means.
I don't know. It sounds cool, though. What does that mean?
It means that my mind is completely blown.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah.
It is. I am questioning the existence of everything.
Right.
Hence the existential. And the lake is all the thoughts that I am skating on, and it's magic.
Yeah. Listen, and he, as they said in the great philosophical movie Coming to America, he ain't lying.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here. So let's tell them first and foremost why the show's late.
Yeah.
So originally we were going to have a very different episode debut today.
Yeah.
We had on, and we will have on, Steve Bassett in studio, who, if you don't know, is the first UAP lobbyist in Washington. And he was on, and we met him we shot at the same studio that we shoot Katie Sackhoff's podcast on. If you guys have been paying attention to that show, you can see the one she just did with Michael Rosenbaum. And anyway, so we shot there, and we had it's like an hour and a half. And to be honest, and I say this with I'm not being anything except in awe. I think we said like 4 or 5 things throughout it, and it's fine because the guy had so much information and kind of really blew our minds. And we were talking about the soul videos, and we were talking about all these things. But there's a certain thing that he said, and I don't want to spoil it for next week, where he gives a percentage on something. And I was like, I'm going to hold you to that percentage, because if that happens, and the reason, and he brings, and what he says is also very relevant to the stuff that Carl Nell was talking about in these soul videos. So what do you think about having Steve on, and excited for the people to see that?
Oh, I think everybody is going to lose their mind for this. You said it. Not a lot of back and forth, I would say, as far as interviews are concerned, but that's by design.
Yeah.
I think that was the best thing that could ever happen, because we say a lot here, Christian, about that we are what this show is really the two of us are just kind of regular guys asking questions.
Yeah.
We are looking for answers. We have been, however you want it, what metaphor do you want? We've been unplugged.
Right.
We have awakened. We are curious. We are asking questions.
Yeah.
More than anything. And I was able to, I won't speak for you, of course, but I was able to sit there and ask a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
And just so many things just came, so much perspective was found in this interview, and I can't wait for everybody to see it. I had the time of my life.
Yeah, so it was a great conversation overall. We sat down with him afterwards, had a conversation with him, and just telling him beforehand that we were just two normal dudes trying to figure this stuff out and asking questions and trying to convey that to other people who are like, what is this? Like, I'm skeptical. What's going on? And then the Soul videos dropped. And so the timing of it is like, well, wait a minute. We were planning on airing it today. But then we're like, well, we've got to talk about these videos. And we talked about them like briefly. It was so early. It just dropped. Steven didn't even have a chance to look at any of them. So we were like, we can't really talk about that too much. So we wanted to talk about a few other things. And we're like, no, let's push that a week and let's really dive into these videos, because even like we have so much stuff. Like even Pavel interviewed Nick Cook, who is a best-selling author, and he's an award-winning journalist. So we have clips from that he has on his channel that he's given us the okay to air some of the clips. That was very interesting. And the stuff that dropped about Sean Kirkpatrick. I mean, there's just so much to talk about today that I was like,
gets me.
Yeah, we can't really. I was like, we have to do it. And I said to you, I thought about it because we had shot that interview yesterday, and then I was like, maybe I can hit up Riley and see if he wants to shoot like Monday night. But then I'm like, I was exhausted. You were exhausted. I wanted to really dive into all the videos and really look at them a little bit more and have kind of a fresh mind. And so I figured if people get the show a little late today, then so be it. But yeah, man, let's start. The first thing I wanted to start with was actually this tweet. All right, Gary Nolan writes, professionalizing a new field of inquiry and human endeavor takes effort and time. This began literally decades ago through the efforts of many. This culminated more recently with the videos brought forward by Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and the New York Times article by Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kane, and Helen Cooper. This includes the efforts of Tom DeLonge, the several Navy pilots who have come forward, Dave Grush, Carl Nell, extraordinary efforts by Senators Schumer, Rounds, Gillibrand, Rubio, several House representatives, too many to mention here, but kudos and thanks, and many others are all part of a relay race. We hand the baton off and move forward to an academic and commercial leg of the race with other groups like ASA, UAP Coalition for Scientific Research, Galileo Project, and many long-standing public legacy organizations. The Soul Foundation thanks Stanford University and Medical School for their unmitigated support in putting together this conference, and we are incredibly thankful to the speakers and participants for their efforts of the conference. Moreover, we immensely thank the film and sound editors, Matt Ford, Fritz Kramer, Jen Carson, Weatherby, and David West, videography, for making the talks fantastic and the sound so incredibly professional. So that's just basically saying, okay, look, here we go. Let's get into this thing. And then if you go to the YouTube channel, and of course I looked, I'm surprised News Nation didn't cover this. The Hill didn't cover this. I couldn't believe it. I was like, they're going to cover it. No one covered this. I was like, what in the world?
It's and I'm interested to see once the coverage starts to kick in, because I feel like, the Soul Foundation dropped a lot.
Everything, yeah.
They dropped a lot of videos, and I was, we've been in the YouTube space for so many years now. I looked at the views, and I'm surprised, and I think that is very much going to change because of the wealth of information that was dropped. And I mean, I'm looking at those names that you just read off. It's like the Avengers coming together.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
And Young Avengers and the X-Men all in one. It's incredible to see all of this, and this opinion is very much colored from our conversation yesterday. But just to look at this, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It is incredible.
It's incredible. So I'm just going to read off some of the names of the people of the videos that they actually posted. I'll show it. I'll show it here. All right, just look at some of these names already. David Grush, Jacques Vallée, Diana Walsh-Pasuka, Iris Victor Grove, Beatrice, I'm not going to get all these names right, so forgive me. Beatrice Varelo, Timothy Gildet, Christopher Mellon, Jeff Kripal, Larry McGuire, Avi Loeb, Isla Whitley, Kevin Newth, Paul Thigpen, Gary Nolan, Hal Puthoff, Peter Skekfish, Carl Nell. That's just like some of the peeps, Riley. I mean, that's all the peeps, but that's like, I mean, that's all the peeps. I mean, it might, minus maybe a few here there, but they had everybody who's everybody on this thing, and it was exactly. Remember now, we talked about this in November when there was that leaked photo about the disclosure plan. That was like one of our big episodes that we had talked about. The photo got leaked, and everybody started talking about, well, what the hell is it? What does that mean? What does that mean? Now, the one that I want to talk about, I guess first, is the Carl Nell one, right? Because that to me was the most fascinating, because it was really like the disclosure about the plan itself.
Yeah.
What did you think about that one?
It really is interesting to see the plan that they have and how meticulous it is, and how they are going into stuff that we have been talking about endlessly.
Right.
And to see that it's a really interesting, and they used like what was the word that he was using for like Schumer and stuff? It was like the
something 8, right?
Yeah, the something 8. Yeah, and there's apologies if I get anything wrong, because there was a lot of information that came out. But yeah, they're talking about like the angels that are Schumer and Rounds and these guys that are coming in at the Senate to bring this forward, to finally show some transparency. The players, I say the Avengers, the X-Men, because that's what it feels like. The mentioning of this is what it is. But what really stood out to me is how long of a process this has been.
Yeah.
And how, what's his name? The guy in the A-Team would say it. I love it when a plan comes together.
Right. Well,
that's what it feels like.
It does. The only thing, and I wrote this in the comment of Carl Nell's, is because they were and this is the one that I would tell people to watch first, because as he's going through everything, and the idea of how long the transparency would take, and the difference between catastrophic disclosure and regular,
that was fascinating,
and plan disclosure, like, and the deal with like catastrophic is just somebody, just whether it's our enemies or someone in general, just dumping everything, all the information all at once, which they say is not the way to go. But one of the things that they say, and that he says, is that it's so crucial that the Rounds and Schumer bill goes through, and what that would mean. And it's also very relevant to the conversation that we had with Steve Bassett, and talking about all the things that was intended and what that bill actually meant, and when you hear Steve Bassett's take on it, of how ultimately Rounds and Schumer were playing chess, while everybody else was playing checkers. But it seems very reliant in this presentation by Carl Nell that they needed this thing to get passed in the way that it was intended, and it didn't. It was gutted by Turner and all these other people. It was gutted. So I'm curious that, because they released this, Riley, as if, because it was shot in November. The thing got crushed at the end of December, or gutted by the end of December. So they don't give any updates inside of it. Like, where does that put your plan? Because your plan is determined by this particular thing moving forward. It doesn't mean it's going to halt it, but it means, like, what is it? It's going to change it for sure. Like, what does that mean overall? That's the question that I would ask, like, Gary Nolan or Carl Nell if I had them on the show. It'd be like, well, what does that mean next? Like, because you guys seem very reliant that was going to plan. Like, when Grush was on Rogan, he was like, this is very important that this needs to happen, but these guys, and that's when he called out the two Mikes for doing what they're doing. The first time I was aware of their names was because of that show. But and I think his interview with Rogan was after this conference, I believe, or around the same time. So
it had to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I don't know like what that means overall, but this is some of the stuff. This was an interesting part. You had mentioned, the review board and Schumer Rounds amendment and all that stuff that Carl Nell was talking about, and this is kind of what he said. Let me show this. All right, so here's a little bit from the Carl Nell conference.
and then this board is to adjudicate whether the stuff actually is TOO and NHI and whether it should be postponed or disclosed. And we'll get into some of the ramifications of that in a minute. So how's this board going to do this? They're going to develop a plan. And this is a big difference from the JFK legislation. So this plan for all records that they deem need to be postponed for whatever reason has got to indicate a benchmark-driven process with specified occurrences and timeframes for downgrading, review, and declassification for everything that's postponed. And then this plan supersedes all previous declassification guidance that may have been applicable to this material. That's extremely important. That's different than the JFK. The JFK was basically like, should we postpone or not? Okay, and then it gets kicked down the road if they say postpone. Schumer basically says, if you're postponing, you got to tell me exactly what you got to do to release it in a benchmark-driven plan. And then this plan basically becomes the declassification guidance going forward. Now, the point is that the president ultimately has the sole and non-delegable authority. So Congress can't impinge upon, presidential executive authority. So the president makes the ultimate decision based on these recommendations, but once the recommendation's made, they're either immediately disclosed or it's postponed, as we said, or put into, and the decision's put into the Federal Register within 14 days. So the president has to provide a reason to the board on what his decision is, both classified and unclassified. The unclassified reason gets published publicly within 14 days. The other point here is that all the records are to be disclosed within 25 years of the date of creation, unless the president deems otherwise. And Congress has appropriated or authorized the appropriation of $20 million to do this.
And also want to thank Mike Colangelo for posting all this stuff. He really breaks it down well on Twitter. He posted a lot of these clips. You should check out his Twitter account to see a lot of these breakouts if you want to see, because he went through all of them. It's a great follow. So Riley, yeah, you hear that, what comes to mind?
Well, the first thing that really stands out to me is they mentioned the holier than thou, or maybe that's not even the right way to put it, but JFK.
Yeah.
And what...
Holy Grail, maybe? The
Holy Grail, there it is. The Holy Grail of these kind of government transparency talks and precedents. And they mentioned JFK. And that just is so apropos for what this is,
yeah.
I feel. Because it is a plan, and it's almost like we learned the hard way with JFK. We're trying not to have that happen here. Although I feel like it's already happened, because there's so much smoke.
Sure.
There's a giant fire somewhere, and it's probably in the basement of the Pentagon. That really stuck out to me, and just having a very serious plan in place to get things moving. And this is like kind of the opening the opening statement of that reveal, and here we go. We're off and running.
I wonder how many of these guys are going to be, there's supposed to be this hearing, the next hearing that's supposed to be like the major hearing with all these people supposed to be coming forward. How many, like Carl Nell is probably someone who's going to testify. You would assume he's got it this time around. You could assume there's like, they said there's anywhere between 15 to 20 people or 40 people. I can't remember what it was, something like big number. Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take something like this, because this is great. What Soul Foundation is doing is great. It's great. And if you're really interested in this topic, to go through what all these experts and people who have been part of this field forever are saying, it's a must listen.
Yeah.
But what's important is that the people who listen to this show, you're going to go and you're going to watch those videos. People who are not paying attention to what's going on are not going to be searching the Soul Foundation videos and don't know what the hell the Soul Foundation is.
Right.
But if the people from the Soul Foundation are talking in front of these, and then the major news outlets start to actually cover it, because you can't deny it anymore. But what Carl Nell is also saying is that you're going to get to a spot where then the president comes out and goes, hey, guess what? And when that happens, doesn't matter who the president, whoever the president is going to say it. And people are going to go, oh, we're living in a very different world now.
Yeah,
And-
that's and they emphasize that
Yeah.
too. You know, the president has the sole kind of authority to do this.
Right.
And you know, if the president were to come out and say,
Listen.
okay, it's real,
Right.
we have ETs, or we have crafts, or there are crafts, or there are things that we do not understand and are doing, that's a very different world we live in.
It is,
You
and
know?
so, and you mentioned that. I want to bring that up and actually show this also. If you notice, Carl Nell talks about terms like NHI and he just certain things that he was talking about. And in this particular clip that I thought was fascinating, Riley, is that this is again from Mike, who clips out the part where Carl Nell explains the terms NHI, Legacy Program, Prosaic Attribution, and TUO that appeared in the Schumer Rounds Amendment. So for us normal folks, like, well, what the hell does all that mean? Well, I think Carl does a great job here in breaking it down, and here it is.
All right, so I've got to kind of move a little faster here. So these are terms of reference in the legislation. So non-human intelligence, at least 18 times cited in there. Any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form, regardless of nature or ultimate origin, that may be presumed responsible for UAP, based on the earlier definition, or of which the federal government has become aware. Legacy Program, all federal, state, local government, commercial industry, academic, private sector endeavors to collect, exploit, reverse engineer, TUO, or biological evidence of NHI. Prosaic Attribution, you remember this was in both of those terms, UAP and TNO. Prosaic Attribution, having a human, either foreign or domestic origin. So UAP is non-human, TNO, human. Technology of unknown origin, this is very important for the eminent domain clause. Any material or metamaterial, ejecta, crash debris, mechanisms, machinery, equipment, assemblies or sub-assemblies, engineering models or processes, damaged or intact aerospace vehicles, or damaged or intact ocean surface or undersea craft associated with UAP, or incorporating science and technology lacking prosaic attribution or known means of human manufacture. So that's what eminent domain applies to.
Okay, that is insane. It's insane. It's insane. It's insane in so many different levels that, now this is a lot of the stuff that I believe was gutted out of the act, by the way.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
But it was in the act. And the fact that, again, the Senate Majority Leader had that in there many times over with the terms NHI and reverse engineering and all these other things in there that like this is basically the acknowledgement of him going, yep, and everybody else going, yeah, this is what is out there, and now this is like these steps towards it. And I'm telling you, I can't wait until you guys hear Steve Bassett talk about this next week, because this is all the stuff that he kind of really breaks down as far as the game plan and and Grush, how he threw everybody off and all these things. And now putting this in like acceleration and hearing all these different terms. These are the terms that we as just the normal people need to get more acquainted with, because this is the kind of stuff that's going to come out more, because you're going to go, what the hell is NHI? What the hell is all this stuff means? And this was a very important part of Carl Nell's presentation, I thought, Riley.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those terms flying out of there, knowing that was part of the thing that was gutted, that it could be looked at in, I'm sorry, I believe it to be confirmation that this is that they have crashed remains, they have that people have been reverse engineering this stuff, that it just feels like a very solid confirmation that this is all really real. That's nice. But real. And it blows my mind. I mean, it continues to be this overwhelming, like, you know, I'm sitting here going, we are already in a different world because this is happening, but there are so many people that aren't aware of this,
right.
that you know, that had no idea that Schumer was standing up there
right.
and doing this. Still to this day, like, I know my father, Schumer, he got up and talked about UAPs, Dad. Huh?
Right.
I didn't see that. Yeah, and he's reading
everything,
his newspaper,
right.
Which is another interesting point that Steve is going to make when in our episode that I'll just leave for that. But about mainstream media, about, you know, why you're not seeing, let's say, ABC, NBC, some of the main, you know, talking about it, but that there are many articles to be found out there in print media.
Yeah.
And that even it's Miss My Dad.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
because he doesn't really believe it.
Yeah, and let me show also. This was essentially the thing that was kind of leaked. Here's this whole overall plan that they had. And remember, this is also before the thing got watered down, but here it is. Okay, so he says the way forward, UAP campaign plan lines of effort. So you look at, you remember, if you watched this show a few weeks back and when we talked about this, and it was January 2024 is demonstrate existence, public, senator, government, you have all this stuff. January 2026, correlate signatures, 2030, characterize performance, October 2034, determine nature, phase 5, engagement, whatever that means, engagement. Then after this,
it's indefinite, you know, it's not, right. It's October 2034 and then indefinite.
Right. So there's investigation, human ethics, anthropology, sociology, religion, scientific research, natural sciences. I mean, they have all these things that are kind of set up of how they're going to do this. They have I love that they've got a full-on plan in place, right? Strategic end state, proper oversight restored, catastrophic disclosure avoided. There's all these things they're trying to do, right? There's all these things that they're trying to do. Now, whether or not they can do it now, and and that's why I'm so curious with that. And I don't want, again, I'm trying not to spoil the interview, but what Steve Bassett said about how this could particularly the stuff that Schumer and Rounds did put into play, and was watered down, that stuff could be reintroduced again, and that Bassett is pretty confident that because of certain things that happen and will happen, it will get passed next time. So I am curious if that is indeed the case and how that's going to work and how they're moving forward in order to do that. Because what Carl Nell also said was they wanted this is okay. So it was called the Gang of Eight, by the way, is what you were talking about.
The Gang of Eight. Yeah, there it is.
So this is one more clip from Carl Nell. Like I said, to me, Carl Nell, I mean, everybody had fascinating stuff, everybody. But Carl Nell to me was the one that I saw so many great clip outs about, and I just so he just said so much. And there's another reason why I think that this guy should just be talking at a lot of different things, especially at the next hearing if they indeed get him. Let's play this clip, and this is again what they want to do as far as the plan. And this is a longer clip, but it's worth it. So here's the last clip that we'll show of Carl Nell. All right, so the sound is a little it's not matched up here all the way, so just forgive us in the way that this clip is. So just listen.
Eminent domain. So maybe we'll have some discussion after this. I want to kind of keep going through here, but there are legal pros and cons. Obviously, if you got an aversion to eminent domain, you probably had an aversion to this part of the statute. But the point here is the government wants to restore oversight and control of the material so it can make better progress scientifically on this. And so the challenge is, does that affect intellectual property rights? And the way the legislation is written is it does not, because any IP created out of the material is retained by the owner. All right, terms of reference disclosure. So the point here is there's a difference between controlled disclosure and catastrophic disclosure. Controlled disclosure is used in the campaign plan. Catastrophic disclosure, I think, was what was alluded to in the prior discussion, where all the information is just dumped out there by an adversary or non-human intelligence to create societal disruption. All right, so this is an important slide because if we want to facilitate this board doing its work, then the barriers that impede that need to be lowered. And so you need to understand what the impediments are to disclosure. And so there's 6 reasons for non-disclosure: national security, lack of a plan, societal disruption, covert agreement, cover for misdeeds, and organizational intransigence. And you could just derive this from first principles. And so a lot of this has been talked about already, but let's look at societal disruption. Challenge to existing authority structures, ontological shock, market crash, false authority syndrome, stagnation of initiative. All of these are issues that are preventing disclosure. They're going to impact the plan that the board develops. If you actually shred through these issues, you realize these are really not government issues. These issues are more effectively solved in the private sector, in the academic sector, in legal reviews and policy discussions. in the natural sciences. So this tees up the opportunity for Saul Foundation and the members here to contribute to the solution of this plan, because there's a linkage here. So there needs to be a campaign plan to synchronize all this, I would argue. You know, DOD's big into plans. So a campaign plan is like a plan about a plan. It's a meta plan, right? So that means, you know, like, cost schedule performance is really not part of your campaign plan. It's just sort of like, this is the direction we want to go. These are the ends, ways, and means that we want to use. And this is like the kind of shared consensus of what we're trying to do. And the shared consensus I would submit is we want proper oversight, because we've got a government that's run by elected officials, and ultimately they're accountable to the public. And they've already recognized that they don't have the appropriate oversight. So we want to get oversight. And we want to get disclosure, but we want to get it through a controlled process. We want to get it in a way that doesn't create this societal collapse, like Eric Klein talked about in 1177 BC, the system collapse of all the ancient societies. This is the order of the potential concern that might be happening here. And then the third piece is, what do we want to do about this problem? Well, we've got to actually address the scientific, technical, ethical, legal, religious aspects of this, and more people need to be involved if we're going to make that progress. So this is the obligatory DOD type of campaign plan chart. So, you know, we've had phase one. We've completed phase one. I would argue phase one ends when we get Schumer. And so it says, you know, demonstrate UAP existence by, you know, January of 24. And you're like, oh, that's crazy. It's never going to happen. It's probably won't happen in my lifetime. I'm saying that that already happened. The Gang of Eight just said that we need this legislation, and they don't have proper oversight. So disclosure is a process. It's not an event, and it's going to stair step across these phases. So phase two is where academia, I think, comes in, and then ultimately we get to the wider public. And so we see, like, October 2030 is maybe the pivot point when this board sunsets. 7 years for the board to do its job, but in order to facilitate the board doing its job, this philosophical investigation, line of effort B, scientific investigation, line of effort C, and private sector investigation, line of effort D, is where we can all contribute to facilitating and lowering that potential barrier. And so I've got maybe a minute or two. I'm going to just jump through a couple ideas that I've got for each of these lines of effort, if we might do that. So this is the government line of effort. Pass Schumer, grant legal amnesty, centralize the data, create a Manhattan Project to address this area, sponsor National Science Foundation grants, charter an NIE, National Intel Estimate, to assess the public-private positions of every country with this topic and where they are with it, and use that to tee up a United Nations Summit or World Congress on developing new norms of behavior in this context, right? So that would be line of effort A. What about line of effort B, the humanities? I think we need a sociological model for analyzing the societal impact for disclosure, and then developing mitigation strategies a priori to address that. Now, some people think that may be less of a concern or more of a concern. It's kind of irrelevant. Like, it's an unknown right now. But we need a plan to address it to lower that concern. Codify the laws of ethics in an environment where we might have a hierarchy of being, where everyone isn't necessarily having equal competitive potential. It's essentially translating our special relativity version of ethics to a general relativity version of ethics, where you've got the problem of a more advanced civilization coming in and disrupting a less advanced civilization. It's the same issue with AI or colonialism.
I mean, dude, I've heard this stuff already, and every time I hear it again, I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, it's everything that, you know, it is one of those things where if you're paying attention to it, and even if all this stuff comes to fruition, I'm still going to be like, wow, it's really happening. But I'm at least preparing myself as I lead up, right? As what they're saying to try to do to everybody else. But you hear that the greater civilization teaching the lesser civilization, but you see in that slide though where my concern comes, Riley, where I say, like, well, here's what has to happen first. The Schumer thing goes and gets passed, and then this, and this, and it's like, yeah, but it didn't. So what's the audible? What's the audible?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think that I look at this, though, the slide, the presentation, the Soul, and all the released videos and everything, and it's just they're ready.
Yeah,
they are ready. And this is not something that it's just like, yeah, you know, once that Senate hearing happens and we get all the answers, it's going to be boom. No, they're ready, and it's meticulous in their planning, because it really is. I mean, can you imagine? We're ready for it. You, me, everybody watching here right now, the curious that might have just found us right now, you're a lot more ready than 99 maybe % of the people out there.
Right.
That stuff like this could drop, and it will be a sideswipe. It'll be like, you know, whoa, just absolutely, you could be befuddled by this and can't even speak a lick of English anymore, and like, what is going on?
I know,
because it is earth-shattering. It is the ramifications to consider. You know, if it just a catastrophic disclosure, you know, things stood out to me. You know, it's like and I'll paraphrase, but like, you know, the societal impact. You know, people like questioning authority. You know, religious ramifications.
Right.
You know, what is like that? That can be like, you know, Leave the World Behind, that Netflix movie.
Sure.
Right? Did you see that, Christian?
Yes, Julia Roberts.
With Julia Roberts, yeah. You know, the society just starts to turn on each other.
Right.
You know, there is something to consider in that, and which is scary.
Right.
Which is kind of scary because you can.
Well, they address it too. They address that stuff, and the whole point is that they are trying to go against all the cast, and they have a plan, right? So that was just the Carl Nell stuff, and we're you know 45 or 40 minutes into this thing, and I got you for a little bit, Riley, right?
Yeah, oh yeah,
because I feel like this is going to be our supersized episode today.
Yeah, we're fine. Let's go.
But before I do that, guys, I want to let you know I'm very excited that you guys have been with us every week, and I've been getting DMs about not only obviously the phenomenon, but you guys have also been listening, in the fact that we try to keep the show going every week, and we try to continue to do this, and we're getting great sponsors in order to do that. And I'm very excited to tell you about two of our wonderful sponsors right now, and that's both ZBiotics and Rocket Money. I'll tell you about both of them. Here we go. So let me also tell you this. Let me tell you about Rocket Money before we move on. I want to tell you about Rocket Money, guys. Rocket Money to me is just, I've told you so many times, and you guys have heard me talk about Rocket Money. Rocket Money, I've been using now, I think, oh man, it's got to be at least almost 2 years now, 1.5 years, 2 years. And so what Rocket Money does is, you know, you have those subscriptions that you have, and you haven't been paying attention to them, and you're like, oh, that app looks amazing, I'm going to do that app. Oh, it's a free trial period, great, 30 days, I got it, I'll remember. You don't remember, and then they start charging you $7, $17, $27, $37 a month, and you're like, whoa, when did that happen? Well, Rocket Money does is they tell you about all the subscriptions that you have and everything that you have, and they go, no, you want that, you need that, don't do that. They tell you how much money you spent the week before, they tell you how much money you're spending in general, they tell you when you have things coming up, when you got bills coming up, you can link everything to it. It is a lifesaver. I love Rocket Money. I checked it this morning and said, okay, remember, you have this, this, and this. Hey, an unauthorized thing, did you do that? I said, yep, I did do that. Okay, great. There you go. They can check your credit, everything. rocketmoney.com/big thing. It is so good. I put the link in the description, by the way, rocketmoney.com/big thing, and you will thank me for that. I love Rocket Money.
Ew.
ZBiotics, by the way, if you guys don't know, it's great because I mean, what you can relate to, John, is we can't do it the way we used to when we were young. No, those days are done, but they are fantastic because it's really a game-changing product. For me, I always use it a night out when I'm drinking, and because it's ZBiotics, and so I just can't bounce back the way that I used to. Right. I got to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day, and that is until I found ZBiotics. And I'll tell you, there's a surefire way to wake up and feel fresh after a night of drinking, and it is with ZBiotics. So what is it? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Now I'm going to tell you. ZBiotics is a pre-alcohol probiotic drink. It is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. Steph Sabral loves these, by the way, loves them. Nice. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut.
Yeah.
It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. And I'll tell you, right before I knew I was going to drink a couple of glasses of wine last night, John, so I had some ZBiotics. Every time I have it, right before I do notice a difference the next day. I'm able to go. Even after a night out or a night of having some fun, I can confidently play. As I mentioned in the beginning, to the Christopher Mellon stuff,
we are not dealing, at least not exclusively, with an intangible interdimensional presence that has for centuries been seeking to subtly influence human affairs. Something along these lines could be happening. It's a fascinating issue. But our military is encountering intelligently controlled, solid objects invading restricted military airspace, sometimes flying in formation. In many cases, they're emitting radiation in the 1 to 3 and 8 to 12 gigahertz range. Multiple credible reports indicate these objects have rendered segments of our nuclear deterrent inoperable. In other recent cases, they're jamming radars on fighter aircraft. We also have multiple cases of near mid-air collisions and other cases involving serious injuries to military and civilian personnel. Indeed, this is an area of research for Dr. Nolan and the Sol Foundation. I'm here to support Gary's and Peter's efforts to advance the scientific study of UAP, but I also recognize that as much as it might like to, we can't let the government divest itself of this issue. Similarly, the government does not have the luxury of limiting itself to pristine scientific information. This is one of the areas in which I differ from Dr. Kirkpatrick, who claims there is, quote, no credible, unquote, evidence of UAP demonstrating capabilities or doing things that violate our understanding of science. To my mind, the Nimitz aviators and radar operators and technicians are eminently credible. The intelligence community certainly prefers rigorous scientific information whenever possible, but it would be untenable, if not suicidal, for the intelligence or law enforcement communities to limit themselves to robust and repeatable sensor data. We rarely have the luxury of sensor information on the intentions of foreign leaders or the precise capabilities of adversary forces, so we do the best we can with what we have. We should consider the accounts of the Nimitz aviators and radar operators as highly credible evidence of intelligently controlled craft doing things we cannot emulate and don't understand. For example, as noted in an earlier presentation, the Tic Tac went supersonic without a sonic boom. It overcame G-forces that would destroy anything built by man. There was no evidence of the plasma that we would normally expect to see at such extreme velocities. I realize the limitations of human reporting, but I see no reason to suddenly change the rules and standards we normally use in the Intelligence Committee when evaluating UAP. I'm raising these issues to remind that the paramount question about UAP for government policymakers and many members of the public will undoubtedly be whether UAP pose an existential threat. I'm thrilled to be supporting investigations of UAP signatures, propulsion materials, metamaterials, and so forth, but we can't dodge this issue in making the case for disclosure. We have to address it head on. Admittedly, nothing as ontologically shocking as disclosure has ever occurred, certainly not in modern times, but there's some interesting precedents we can examine.
I mean, I think that one was very important.
That's huge.
Yeah, because
this is the one for me.
Yeah,
it gets me.
Because,
it gets me.
Because that's the one that we ultimately, why we started doing this in the first place. It's like,
yes,
okay, we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is, but there's clearly something flying around in the sky that, as he said, very credible reports and very credible people who have seen these things. And the idea that there's been some of the reported in like the late 60s about the entire nuclear, normally there was like, if you go into the report of it, there was like the nuclear facility that was normally, you know, you'd have like maybe every once in a while, maybe there'd be like a little bit of a faulty missile, and maybe it was possible that one of them shut down, maybe. Mm-hmm. But one event where they saw something hovering above it, and where the witnesses saw it, shut them all down. The entire thing, like all was 5 or 6 or however many there were. I'm definitely not getting it all right. And like I said, not an expert, just from what this case says. And there's like a few of those witnesses still alive, I think, from that time. But it's clearly one of the reports that Mellon is mentioning. He's talking about how the fact that these things are going sonic boom with no sound and all, like there's. And if
the G-force would crush these things.
Yeah, and I love how he opens it. I love how he opens it up and says, look, we're not necessarily saying here that it's interdimensional and all these type of things, which it very well could be, but that's not the point. The point is there's stuff that's in the sky, flying around, that's doing things that we don't know how it's doing it. We don't know how they're doing it, and it's been happening for a long time, and this is one of the reasons we need disclosure. And I like how professionally he was like, I don't agree with Dr. Kirkpatrick and what he's saying about this because this. And he uses the science of it all. So I thought this was a very important part of the presentation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's especially a line that I circled. You know, we have multiple cases of near mid-air collisions and other cases involving serious injuries to military and civilian personnel.
Right.
Indeed, this is an area of research Dr. Nolan and the Soul Foundation they want to do. So, you know, that's so important is that, okay, we're not saying they're little green men from Mars. We're not saying they're interdimensional. We're not saying, you know, they're Santa Claus. We are saying that we have credible reports of objects that have rendered, you know, our radars going off, have nuclear radioactive signatures, and that we have credible witnesses and instances, multiple cases of near mid-air collisions and other cases involving serious injury. That, to me, is reason enough for government disclosure because it's putting our military in jeopardy, including our civilian populace. That is so important. The civilians fly around every day. We fly around every day in an airplane. Now, we may not, you and I, and many people may not be trained in putting our lives in jeopardy every day like our military do. But this all goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, they're witnessing these things. The tic-tac, he brings up the tic-tac, which is so important because that is something that is video that is out there that everybody can see and go, what is that?
Right.
You know, and